The smile came easy. The kind of smile you wear as a kid, or if you're lucky as a teenager, when the world feels magical and untouched. The weather? Absolutely perfect. Clouds drifted overhead, not just cotton candy-like, but actual swirls of pastel, soft blues, sugar yellows, gentle pinks and lavender, painting the sky with sweetness. The sun poured down with friendly warmth, and the grass below seemed to soak it up, humming quietly with life. Butterflies danced everywhere. Some flitted fast, others floated slow, and a few landed on me, arms, shoulders, even my head, like I belonged here. They didn't mind me one bit. All shapes, every color you could imagine, wings flickering like painted glass in motion. And the flowers? Let's just say, my smile wasn't going anywhere. Ahead of us stretched a forest, but not the kind I knew. These trees stood tall, free somehow. That was the word. Free. At first, I couldn't quite place it. Then I remembered, most trees back home fought. Competing for light, space, survival. Clawing skyward, branches tangled in conflict. I'd gone canoeing once before my mom got sick, and the trees there leaned over the river like they were gambling between sunlight and a fall into the current. Always growing in those same desperate arcs. But these trees? These trees danced. One leaned dramatically like it was mid-dab. Another had its trunk twisted with a proud jut of its hip. Their branches curved wildly, joyfully, like they'd never known struggle. They didn't just grow, they boogied. And then, the mushrooms. Don't even get me started on the mushrooms. Christopher. Huh? Sorry, I said, blinking back to the moment. Regina was grinning beside me, like she knew exactly where my thoughts had wandered. She stood steady under the weight of a backpack stuffed with both her gear and mine, because that's one of my limitations. Not that she seemed to mind. She took a long, contented breath of the alien air and spun slowly in the meadow, butterflies orbiting her like planets. You don't have to apologize, she said, smiling wider. Not even a little. This place, it gets to you. Doesn't it? Her words gave me permission to take it all in again. The sky wasn't just blue, it shimmered. The leaves weren't quite green. Some were gold, others a deep teal, and one tree didn't even have leaves at all, just glowing green spheres blooming directly from its limbs. It's amazing, I breathed. Remember this moment. Because things won't always stay this bright. Not here, not now. But this memory, this perfect blend of color and peace and wonder, this is the kind of thing that makes all the chaos worth it. Super worth it. This was Christopher, remembering how it felt to be in awe. I blinked. Once. Twice. A few more times for good measure. Then ran my hands over my face like I could scrub reality off my skin. My boss, former boss, had the decency to look mildly ashamed. I wish it didn't have to be this way, Chris, he said. It didn't. This wasn't some tragic inevitability. This was a decision, his decision, made by someone I used to think was pretty cool. We'd gamed together. Streamed a couple co-op campaigns. He'd been a good teammate once. The customers aren't comfortable with your, conduct, he added. We need someone who can greet folks with a smile and a laugh. Right. A smile and a laugh. Like I was the customer service equivalent of a haunted doll or something. I stood slowly, still blinking like maybe, just maybe, I could clear the gunk from my eyes and see the world the way it was supposed to be. Limping like I do, I turned toward the door. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't cry. He didn't get to see that part of me. I'll get another job, I muttered as I stepped outside. I'll go save the universe or something. Which was, frankly, a pretty tall order. Especially for someone with scoliosis twisted by osteomyelitis and compounded by a childhood injury that wrecked my growth plates. Running? Not my thing. Jumping? Not a chance. But hey, saving the universe? Stranger things had happened. For now, it was just me and the slow, aching walk of shame out the door. I didn't look back. I didn't ask for pity. I did need a job, but I didn't need it from him. This is Christopher. Getting fired. But not for long.
Hey, welcome to Firescale Audiobooks. If you enjoy our audiobooks, please consider subscribing to the channel. Also, feel free to share your review in the comments section below.
Now. I don't get it, I told Regina. Her auburn hair was definitely full of more luster and bounce than on the other side of the portal. It seemed less brown and more reddish-orange. Her eyes weren't that clear mountain pool blue either. I'm pretty sure they had little flecks of purple in there as well. The sky looked like it had some patches of slickness to them, fuzzing to an iridescent rainbow in certain places. And as the trees grew closer and clearer, I could see that I was correct. Some of them didn't have leaves at all, but perfectly spherical. What?
Bulbs?
Bulb seems like a decent name for them. And the trees all seem to have faces.
Oh.
Regina asked, then broke into a wide smile again when she turned back. She wasn't wearing her glasses any longer. Her freckles were more pronounced. And they were changing color as well.
Oh, right, of course.
You know, when I first set foot here, I had the same thought. I couldn't make sense of anything I was seeing. I wanted to spend hours and hours looking at every individual thing. I had a million questions. Another laugh bubbled up out of her. At least a million. She hadn't seemed this talkative on the other side. I didn't mind, really. It was a lot better than what I was used to, in my old life. And don't you worry, good buddy, we've got you covered. You're going to have all million of those questions answered, even while you end up with 5 million more questions. We haven't even done any of the system intro shit yet.
Whoopsie doodle.
What? I asked, laughing. We're supposed to be good ambassadors here, rookie, she said. That starts with language, you know? Be the good you want to see in the world. Which is how I say fiddlesticks instead of, you know, fuckity fucky fuck, and I say fudgesicles and aw sheep dip and fluff like that. So now I go fluff that. And sheep on a shingle.
And cheese and rice.
Geez, oh pizza.
I blurted.
We shared a laugh. There you go. I guess that's your first lesson here. Good ambassadors, be the good you want to see in the world. She reached over and took my hand. I stared at it, surprised by the contact but at the same time not so surprised. I grew warm at her touch, and realized I could see just a hint of her bra under the pink tank top she had on. I told myself not to blow it, not to get hard. Don't do it, Christopher, I told myself, grinning like an idiot. There wasn't anybody else around. We were in a completely different world. We could, if she wanted to. Okay, I was growing hard already. Doesn't take long when you're under 30 and only not a virgin by a technicality. Regina was a beautiful human, who was growing more beautiful by the second. She had the kind of personality I wanted to bathe in. I could watch her smile and listen to her giggle forever, at this moment. And if she wanted to give Christopher a little extra lesson before we got to the city, I wasn't going to stop her. I wasn't in any position to hit on her though. The way I was right here and now, she was so far out of my league I was surprised I could even form a coherent sentence. Come on, we're almost to the best part.
We are. Oh yes, she said.
I can't believe I've been away from him for a whole month. This was the hardest. She started pulling on my arm, and although my legs protested at moving this fast, we broke into a jog through the tall grass.
Oh.
It made perfect sense that she had someone, and it was further proof that I shouldn't have even considered what it would be like to be with her.
Tweedle D, she called out sing-song.
Tweedle D, where are you? Did I say perfect sense? It suddenly made a lot less sense. We rushed through the grass faster and faster, with her skipping and jumping up in the air to get a slightly better view, calling out. And then someone answered.
No, something. Tweedle Dee, she squealed in delight.
A tawny fox-like creature leapt out of the grass and tackled Regina backwards. I was sent sprawling as well, and only caught flowers amongst its blurry form. I got up onto my elbows, saving my misshapen legs a bit of ache, and just watched them. She was glowing, while the creature licking her face and yipping with glee was the most adorable thing I'd ever seen in my life. It was like a fox, but flowers sprouted out of its brown ears, and where its tail should have been was instead a garland made entirely of flowers. Or rather, where its tail should have been plural. It had at least 5 I could see, flicking and wagging. Eventually Regina got to her feet cradling Tweedle D and gushing to him in baby speak about how much she missed him, and how she felt terrible every moment they were apart, and she would apply to have no R&R going forward. They nuzzled noses before Regina put Tweedle D down onto the grass and stretched out her hand. Come on, we've got to get you to the city, get you set up with your own companion. Wait. I glanced past her to the creature, who was looking up at me with bright, intelligent eyes and padding along next to her. It seemed to know what I was thinking, and its tongue lolled out happily. It made a yipping bark, as if to tell me, that's right, you're now the luckiest monkey flubber on the planet. I ignored the protesting legs and headed forward, toward my own Tweedle D. This is Christopher falling in love with life again.
Before I died.
Would you like to continue? The game asked on screen. Sometimes you play the oldies. You play for nostalgia. You play to enjoy something simpler. For a guy like me, for whatever reason, this hasn't worked on his streaming channel. Not yet at least, but there's a chance. After all, there are these 2 guys playing all these SNES games on their channel and it's making enough for them to live comfortably. But these games were pretty damn hard. Honestly, The ones from the 90s are practically impossible without cheat codes. Christopher does not do cheat codes. Would I like to continue? Nah, I told the game, but let the timer run out on the screen. I didn't have the energy to deal with this today. I didn't have the energy to deal with a lot of things lately. You're terrible at this, someone commented on the stream. You know it, I told him, but the commenter was already gone, bringing my viewers down to 0. Terrible at this game?
Terrible at streaming?
Terrible at life? Maybe some combination of two, or maybe all three. I switched the stream off, got my broken ass up off the couch slowly, and made my way over to the door. This is Christopher's hobby, failing to generate any additional income.
Now.
Regina looked at me, a gleam of delight in her eye. You want to meet him? I glanced down at the creature. It wasn't quite a fox and definitely wasn't a bouquet of flowers. It was, however, adorable all the way through. Absolutely. She bent and got her face in his.
D, this is Christopher.
He's our new recruit. We're going to take him over to the castle and get him registered, then we'll escort him to the academy. A happy-go-lucky expression appeared on Dee's face, his tongue lolling. Just let him sniff you, she told me. I first had to sit, because my legs really don't like me hunkering down. After that was as awkward as could possibly be, and after I made noises like an octogenarian, I put my hand out.
Dee sniffed at my hand, then yipped twice.
The sound was filled with pure joy, and I couldn't tell you how I knew that. I just knew. Dee leaned into my hand and allowed me to scratch at her head and ears, and the flowers sprouting inside and around her ears.
Are they real? She nodded. They're real.
Dee is partly mammalian and partly plant, so he photosynthesizes and also consumes food. The working theory right now is that the photosynthesis is for emergency purposes. He usually eats like a horse. Dee liked the scratches, just like any doggo, so I went a little overboard, getting behind his forelimbs and over his back. He then went for the belly scratches too. The fur was incredibly soft there, long and white. He felt pure and magical. He was definitely the latter. Regina snorted laughter. Oh yeah, he'll just lay there the whole day if you keep doing his belly like that. Are there more like him? She waved her hand up and down. Yes and no. There will be a lot of fox-like creatures, but some of them will be part fish, some will be part lightning, some will be part steel or bronze, and then you'll get the weird ones. Weird like what? Part fox and part whimsy. Part fox and part strategy expert.
Fox with wings. Foxicorn. Void fox.
I laughed, watching Dee's leg twitch with each soft belly scratch. Imagining a unicorn fox and then trying to wrap my head around what a void fox might be was both hilarious and difficult. I guess I'd better get to the academy and start learning everything from teachers and books, in classrooms.
She grinned.
I confess to being pretty terrible at explaining things. It's why I'm a ranger and guide instead of a teacher.
I nodded.
Any idea what you'll end up being? Absolutely none. Although I tried to get some of the reading done before I made it through the portal, there was a lot to prepare for my family.
A division of income.
I'd be making more money than I'd ever imagined, and that money wasn't coming to the new world with me. Instead I set up auto deposit, then auto divided it out between Sarah, who would get a monthly stipend with a message for Braden from Toph, and my folks would get most of the rest. They'd get a similar message. A tiny bit was staying, and would be headed for managed stock buys through a company Johnson introduced me to. So long as money went to my parents and my sister, great. And as I'd watched, Dick Johnson put over $200,000 into my account as a signing bonus. As a show of good faith. I just goggled at him. For the rest, there was also a scary bit about signing a living will, buying up some premium life insurance, and so much more that it became a dizzying headache. By the time they brought me to the portal location and into the portal room, I'd been taking regular naps after hours in the office. Finally, after mountains of paperwork and non-disclosure agreements, they went into the final stretch, what I should pack, basically nothing, and what I could expect in the other world. The details were left vague. Everyone's experience is different, the HR person said. You will see magic. Here, Dick Johnson returned. We've left it vague for several reasons, he said. 1. Most people don't believe it. 2. You've already signed all these non-disclosure agreements. The less you know, the less you might distribute around the internet. Not that anyone would believe you, but we don't like to take those sorts of chances. 3. It kind of spoils the fun. I just nodded. Okay. The fun. The fun. This is Christopher rediscovering fun. I peered down at my mom in the hospital bed. How you feeling? Hey buddy, she said, and gave me a vague smile. Her motions were loose and barely controlled. Just pulling her head away from facing the window and over toward me looked like it took a lot of effort. She was blinking at me too. "We have her on some pretty intense opioids right now," the nurse said. "She was in a lot of pain earlier." "I thought she was getting better," I said. I spotted the vase I'd given her, which had held the flowers I periodically replaced. Or at least, I spotted a shard of that vase and a few specks of dirt in the corner of the room. They must have swept it up after.
After she threw it?
She could have bumped it, but all the way across the room? She is getting better, son. It's going to be a long trek, and sometimes there'll be some dips down before she gets back up.
All right.
But she is going to get back up, right? This is temporary, right? Your mom's going to be fine. This is Christopher's life spiraling out of control. As I scratched beneath the chin of a creature with soft flowers in its ears and multiple tails, I got it. Why spoil this kind of amazing surprise?
Of course you would never.
Regina indulged me for a little while longer, allowing Tweedle D to roll around on his back and make the most adorable noises of appreciation. "Shall we?" Tweedle D hopped obediently up as though he fully understood. I wondered how much he did or didn't understand, and added it to the list of a million bajillion questions that I couldn't ask and Regina would be terrible at answering. Who discovered the portal? Did the Chinese, the Russians, or the French have portals of their own? What was the purpose of us coming here? How often did creatures like Tweedle D manifest out of magic? Could I eventually get a companion creature like it? I dearly hoped the answer was yes. My mother was allergic to dogs and so was I, and they'd always considered that the last nail in the coffin for pet ownership. It wasn't a discussion that I could have with them. The only times I ever brought it up, it was swiftly shot down.
No dog. But could I have a foxicorn?
Or a fox Pegasus, like a fox with wings?
Or a fox made of ice?
My mind spun off and away from the other questions that I'd considered, and settled on this one. Maybe I could have something even bigger than a fox. Maybe there were giraffes and hippos and elephants with batches of crystals growing out of them, or psychic ostriches. I'd gotten to my feet, slowly of course, and hobbled after her when she set out with her purposeful strides, carrying half the contents of my pack like they were nothing. For a time the minutes passed in companionable silence. I marveled at all the things. She glanced back at me periodically and grinned at the expression on my face. I must have looked like a stone dope.
I didn't care.
Over there was a mushroom the size of a skyscraper with what looked like tiny dragons flying around the cap. As I watched, one of the caps of the distant mountain lifted off and over the course of the next 10 minutes, floated over to a different mountain before settling down again.
Regina. Could I get one?
One of the like Tweedle D?
Is he yours?
It seems like he's yours.
She laughed. Slow down there, cowboy.
I know what you're getting at, and the short answer is yes. I jumped up and then thrust my elbows back.
Yes. She laughed again.
It's a little more complicated than that, but yeah.
You get one.
Let's get you to the city.
Lead the way, I told her.
Colossal mushrooms are weird, but not as large as upside-down floating cities, buildings made of trees, or places where gravity works both ways at once. You have to imagine a staircase that both ascends and descends at the same time to get what I was seeing. People walking upstairs from below on one side and walking downstairs, also from below on the other side. Straight out of an M.C. Escher. Castle towers that had crenellations on 4 different sides, like a cross, with people manning those towers on all 4 sides. And nobody was falling off. The whole guard tower cross situation slowly rotated clockwise, while the banners rippled in a wind that made no sense, and guards stood rigid at attention. Regina had been in the middle of sketching out a bare skeleton of what the heck was going on here. The trouble was, she wasn't very good at it. Her good-natured manner, cheerful laughter at herself, and frequent petting of Tweedle D made it seem like it didn't matter. So, the gist of the world is that magic is everywhere. It's suffused into all the objects and organisms all the time. It's, sort of, possibility. Until you add intent, it just sort of sits around and collects. The teachers at the academy will be able to explain a lot better than I can, but the basics go like this. If enough magic collects in one place, it spontaneously generates objects or life forms, she laughed, half embarrassed. Or elements or emotions or acts of nature. Sorry, I'm not explaining this very well. She gestured to a large column of purple-red vines waving in the middle of the meadow, looking more like tentacles than vines. But the vines sported leaves and thorns. That, over there, is a manifestation. Is that a plant or a creature? You have to understand that the lines get blurry. Tweedle D here is mostly an animal, but some bit of plant. Like an 80-20 split. And the lines get blurry in some weird ways, like, there'll be creatures that are also elements. Creatures that are also feelings. Plants that are also elements. Elements that are also feelings. What? She blew out an exasperated sigh. There are mixes of all kinds of stuff. I can't explain it all that well. Save it for the academy. Just trust me, that vine thing right there is maybe half creature, maybe a little less, and around half plant, probably a little more. And there's a mine where miners found a vein of crystallized excitement. And also a river that was fire. And a creature that was also your pleasant dreams. That is so. Fudged in the A. She was also growing less normal as the walk went on. Her freckles had definitely multiplied, and they definitely had started going different shimmery colors. Because they were also shimmering. You've probably noticed, magic is collecting on me, she said, gesturing to her shoulders, where the freckles gleamed iridescent colors, and it's collecting on you. What? She produced a mirror and showed it to me. Sure enough, my eyes had already changed to a violent monarch butterfly orange and black patterning. My hair was wilder than it had been a half hour ago, the mousy brown frosted with orange tips. And I had an odd pattern of organic lines running over my face, faintly darker than my regular skin tone.
Holy shiznits. I know. Both of us stopped. D.
What is it? Tweedle D was whining, and his tails were tucked down beneath his legs. He clearly didn't like whatever he smelled or heard. Veering off, I went in search of the sound I'd heard. It sounds like, oh dagnabbit, what's that smell? I came upon a figure in the tall grass, lying there and making a pitiful sound. Worse, though, was the stench. It became thicker and stronger the closer he got to the creature. The thing he was looking at was all different colors. All the soft pastels ran together in different ways, sometimes creating abstract flowery shapes, and other times running down its body like stems or leaves. It was humanoid vaguely, with a number of spindly limbs all along a long trunk-like body. I realized its head was a flower. It was also bleeding black. Several wounds on its body ran with ichor directly down into the dirt, where it was pooling. Hey, I said gently, reaching out a hand.
Hey, what happened?
Who did this?
Who did oh?
It became clear that several of the petals had fallen off when it raised its head to look at me. It appeared to have 4 eyes or perhaps 6, but they weren't organs, just suggestions in the middle of the sunflower-like center of the flower, where all the pollen would sit. A large mouth shape turned down as it locked those 5 or 3 or 4 eyes on me and made another keening cry. You said oh, I told Regina, not taking my eyes off the pitiful sight. That means you know what this is and what's happening. That, she said, is a god. I'm sorry. I'm getting ahead of myself. The question of how a college dropout recently fired from a job at a game store got to a world of magic could be answered by a single gold coin. So I had gotten fired from my job, failed to turn streaming into an asset that would propel my life forward in a way that made work fun, and on top of that, a lump of cells was in the process of very slowly eating my mother. That had been on my mind enough to land me in the manager's office at my job and end my career as a cashier at the game store. It had been enough of a distraction to mess up my attempt at turning streaming into a side gig. It got worse, and that only matters because the worst got me out of my house, and got me the job. 2 things happened that I don't really want to talk about, but they matter, so here they are. My father wasn't handling my mom's condition well. He was presently drunk and trying to put a 62 T-bird together without the patience to do so. Every problem made him erupt into a swearing fit. The second thing was my sister calling me and asking me to meet. This meant she needed money. I drove to my sister's house in my mom's car, and sighed when I parked on the street. The house was in a bad neighborhood, it was small, and the yard was completely out of control. 2 cars were in the driveway, and between the 2 of them, they might have made a decent car, but neither of them worked well. She was already out on the slab of concrete that served as her front porch. Pale, bags under her eyes, hair looking unkempt, bobbing my nephew up and down absently on one hip and holding her phone in the other. Toph, listen, she said before I even said a word, I don't like doing this, okay? I don't like asking for money. You know that, right? Tears were threatening. I bent and gave the toddler a grin, and he grabbed onto my finger. I made some silly noises and got him to smile, then took him off her hands. He was still small enough that I could hold him for a while without my legs starting to give me trouble. How you doing, Braden? I asked him. Riss, he said, and giggled. Unc Riss. That's right, buddy. Uncle Christopher. I need help, she said, not willing to wait for the pleasantries to be over. I made sure not to sigh, and keep my face neutral for what was going to be a string of demands. What happened? She took me into the house, where I immediately saw that the place had been smashed up. There was a hole in the wall just opposite the entryway. Mirror glass had been swept up and sat in the dustpan not far off. I have to get the locks changed, Toph. My face twitched. She didn't know about my job, she didn't ask about Mom, and she didn't seem to care.
Travis threw a fit, she said. He lost his mind.
Broke fucking everything. Ucking. My nephew parroted. It seemed like the failure to watch her language in front of her own son was enough to cause her to break down. The tears came on hard. It was ugly crying time. Travis. I'm pregnant, Christopher. I literally staggered back a few steps, like the words had weight and she'd struck me with them. I couldn't have asked all the questions on my mind if I'd wanted to. Travis found out, it's not his, she sat in between the sobs. The baby isn't his? She was sobbing now, getting snot and tears all over me shoulder. And I left her like that for some time, to get it out of her system. She had been like this ever since I could remember. At least 10 years. Long enough that I had trouble bringing to mind a time when she wasn't in serious trouble or needing our parents to bail her out. And now that events had gone from bad to as bad as they could possibly get for my mother, the money would have to stop coming. My father was still making money, but if he couldn't stop drinking, that wouldn't last either. He'd get fired. We made our way through the house towards the playroom, which had been the dining room and now contained a small kid fence with a handful of toys on the cracked linoleum. A lot were from Goodwill. I put Braden down slowly, carefully. I couldn't have my legs buckling under me. Sarah, I told her gently, so damn gently. We can't. I can't do this anymore. She pulled away with her face disbelieving and rage already blossoming there. What the fuck, Toph? Moms, she's dying, Sarah. She stared at me. Wild calculations were going on at a furious pace and I couldn't believe how fast she blew up. Her hands flew up in the air, waving back and forth. Oh yeah, I know. I'm the bad daughter, you're the good son. Sarah's the super fuck-up who can't do anything right. Doesn't visit her mother in the hospital. What a piece of shit I am. So I deserve to have Travis come over and beat the shit out of me whenever he wants, is that it? Stop it. Nobody said any of those things, I said, summoning up the willpower to stay cool. What do you need? She took a deep breath, already knowing she'd won. I just need enough to change the locks. Like now. Today. I don't know when he'll come back. And then she would just need enough to do whatever else would be next. I didn't bother to tell her that we'd had objections to her moving in with Travis in the first place. That ship had sailed. Nor would she move back. That wasn't going to work either. She and my parents had had a spectacular blow-up over Travis and the first baby. They weren't going to take her back, and she wasn't going to move back. I ended up sending her money through my phone, frowning at the diminishing balance in my own account. It was close to nil right now, and wasn't going to suddenly balloon out unless I got a job. I could maybe drive a taxi as a gig worker. Deliver food as a gig worker. Do people's grocery shopping as a gig worker. I could drive for a good few hours at a time without my legs giving me too much trouble. Don't sigh, I told myself, no big sighs. Sarah's got enough on her plate. There. She had the locksmiths on the phone a second later. 2. It wasn't until the guy slid the gold coin in front of my face that I really believed he was telling the truth. He'd answered my application only 4 hours after I sent it in, with my resume and a personal essay on why I needed the job. The job description had just promised good pay and travel opportunities with on-the-job training, and that was it. So, I decided, hell with it. I could always scope the place out and tell them to fuck off. Good pay didn't actually mean anything. I'd need a real figure before we went anywhere. The man himself was about as nondescript as you can get, clean-shaven, average height, boring hairstyle, plastic rims on his glasses. The only thing remarkable was that his suit fit. I couldn't tell you how many times I'd lamented having a suit that bunched or sagged around the shoulders, or hung oddly. Then again I was buying all thrift shop stuff. My parents weren't made of money. Style and color of the suit though? Designed to be unobtrusive. The man held up his phone, looking at the headshot I'd sent in, and nodded toward me with a bland smile. He walked over. You're Christopher? Christopher Fletcher. I am. Great. Do you want anything? My company's buying, so go nuts. I stood with some difficulty, and shook his hand. What can I call you? Mr. Johnson, he said, in a tone that said it wasn't his real name and he was very pleased to be making fun of me in this situation. Dick Johnson. That clinched it. He wasn't a real person. That wasn't his real name. Dick Johnson. Ye Irea, he said, laughing. It's like saying your name is Boner. I promise you, though, the job is real, I'm a real person, and I represent people who have no trouble paying for your meal, Mr. Fletcher. It still seemed too good to be true, pretty fly-by-night. Did they just abduct people and put them to work in a sweatshop? Steal their kidneys? Perform experiments on them with psychotropic drugs? It was your average greasy spoon. The name of the place was Fat Louie's. I pointed to the circular glass case with all the desserts I'd never been able to afford. I told him I'd take a slice of blueberry pie, a burger, fries, and a milkshake.
Strawberry.
I could afford about 3 more meals like this, or one more favor for Sarah before things started to look desperate. Soon I had pie and a milkshake in front of me, and the promise of my food coming up in just a moment.
Dick Johnson had a coffee.
Let me start out by giving you one of these, he said, and produced a thing like a poker chip on steroids. It was almost half an inch thick, and almost 3 inches across. It was a coin like you'd see in a movie, and nowhere else. He plunked it down on the table before sliding it across. I stared at it. The image of a winged person appeared on it, one leg outstretched and the other bent, looking like she was blowing me a kiss. Around the edge were inscriptions, but none that I could read. None that I'd ever seen on Earth. I looked at him. He looked at me, with that smug and self-satisfied smile of someone who has told a joke you're either going to get, or you're not. If you do, good.
If you don't, better.
I continued looking at him. And he finally broke into a wide smile, then sipped his coffee. You can touch it if you want. I did, finding it to be actual metal, possibly gold, and heavy. I turned it over, and studied the image engraved on the back. This one showed a henge, but not Stonehenge, behind that a canopy of trees, and beyond that jagged mountain peaks. More inscriptions sat beneath the henge and ringed the coin, in the same language I didn't know and had never seen. I glanced back up at him. He continued staring with that impassive, maybe smug smile. And sipping his coffee. One last look at the coin showed me it wasn't all gold. Tiny glittery specks of some other colors than gold showed when I turned the coin over, and when I tilted it. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this, I told him. This is how you're going to live once we get you a job, he said. I'll be paid in these nice heavy made-in-China coins? What do I do, put them up on eBay? My food came, and conversation died while the waitress topped off Dick Johnson's coffee, asked me if I wanted more milkshake, and then left when Dick Johnson told her I could indeed use another milkshake. I took several fries and chewed them suspiciously, staring at the man again. Finally I waggled the hefty coin at him.
Yes, the coins.
You actually use them in the workplace. We pay in American dollars, Christopher. Roughly 15 times more than what you were making at the game store, to start, with advancement opportunities, immediate full healthcare coverage, furnished housing, travel, quarterly bonuses are possible, and even hazard pay. Hazard pay. He nodded, so I snorted.
Mr. Johnson.
It sounds like you looked at my resume, but you clearly didn't read my personal letter. On the contrary, Mr. Fletcher, we read it. We liked it very much.
It was sincere. Open. Brutally so. I gulped.
I'd put in that my legs had been messed up since grade school, my mom was dying, Dad wasn't taking it well, and Sarah was a fucking mess. I figured all my resumes would just get tossed out. What is it you do at your company, then? And how is someone like me going to end up earning hazard pay? We'll be letting you choose, but what I'd like to do is put you into a trainee program, where you'll start drawing paychecks immediately, and figure out which line of work you'd like to go into. We need employees out away from the main city area, helping out with smaller, isolated towns. Nothing dangerous initially, but just know that we can triple your pay if you choose to enter hostile territory as part of your duties. I went to hand him the coin, but he held up a hand. It's yours. I studied it further, turning it on its edge and spinning it on the table. The way of it made the coin go wud as it spun. The glittery bits threw off sparkler of light. It was a fake, and they'd embedded sequins or cubit zirconias in there. 5 times your annual wage to start. And we'll be giving you 2 weeks off every 3 months. I stared at the fake coin. It's cute. His look turned puzzled for just a moment before his grin broadened out. Ah, right. I can assure you that this coin is very real. In the sense that this fork is real, yes. It's a real thing that your company has produced. He smiled indulgently again, smugly also. Is this cuneiform? It doesn't look like it. It is indeed not. The cuneiform marks of the Babylonians are, I'm told, the closest we might get in this world. The words hung in the air between us. This world. What is this about, Mr. Johnson? You want my internal organs? I'd sell them, but you know, There's no way they're going to pay for my mom's cancer treatments. I barked out bitter laughter. My sisters turned into a money suck, too. And there's definitely no way you're selling me into slavery. I wouldn't dream of it, Mr. Fletcher.
This world.
It's so strange how just a week later I'd be grinning from ear to ear, having my breath taken away by the scenery and the possibilities, and having my family's expenses handled by my salary in another world. Okay then, why me?
He leaned in.
You need us as much as we need you, Mr. Fletcher. While you're on the job site, we can make sure your family here has access to those funds in order to cover the costs of all their needs. This hurt my chest to hear. Like hurt, but in a good way. I wouldn't have to strand Sarah in limbo and run the risk of forcing my only nephew to starve. My mother would have good care. My father would hopefully stop destroying himself.
This world. I leaned in.
Listen, if you guys are going to make me a slave or sell my organs to a Chinese businessman, I need like $1 million.
2 million.
Johnson stared at me for a minute before giving me an affectionate smile. Enough that they won't have to worry, okay?
I whispered. They'll be set for life.
Oh, Mr. Fletcher, that won't be necessary.
I love the name, by the way.
A professional arrow maker.
I hope you'll join us.
Please drop in within the next week and we'll get everything sorted.
After a week, he shrugged.
I'll have to fill the position. He slid his card across the table. It listed his name, Johnson, his profession, HR, and the address of an office building halfway across town. Then he dropped a stack of 5 $20 bills on the table, gave me one last smile, and headed out. Late that night, the gold coin began breaking apart into streamers of light and smoke. It would take another 24 hours for it to dissolve entirely. I stayed home and watched it disintegrate.
This world.
I drove over to the address on the card the day after the coin had vanished completely. And this is Christopher getting a job. It turned out Nakamaman was a shortened form of Nakama and monster, the former meaning companion in Japanese and the latter totally obvious. But apparently also Japanese? Companion monsters. Companionals?
No, that was stupid. Monsterpanions? Even worse.
Okay, I gave them mental consent to stick with the name they gave it. My mind continued to swirl. How cool would it be if I got a friggin' land octopus made of gems and precious metals? Or a Pegasus plus unicorn, but also a panda bear. The flying ones could make for some awesome rescue squad stuff. A whole lot had just been launched at me in a very short time. Gods, Nakamaman, people trained to deal with the plight of corrupted gods, a big system screen that popped right up in front of my face. There were corrupted gods. There were game stats.
I had a token.
I had a special ability. I realized I had something.
An issue.
In my peripheral vision, several small bursts of dancing light. I grabbed at one with my hand. Achievement, first near-death experience.
That was close.
You nearly perished. Let's try to avoid that kind of thing going forward, shall we? Reward, plus 5 free tokens. Achievement, first Nakamaman encountered. What mysterious and amazing creatures they are. You have encountered a Vulpitunia. Reward, plus 1 free token. Achievement, first small god encountered. In a world of magic and monsters, we really should have been prepared for the existence of gods. You have encountered a god. Humbling experience, was it not? Reward, plus 1 free stat level.
Achievements.
I exulted, and resolved to look around later for an achievement list so I could go after all of them. Collecting things was definitely my jam. And yes, encountering a god was definitely a humbling experience. Holy crikey, it was not something I was going to handle lightly going forward.
You okay, boss? Regina asked.
I realized I'd been staring vacantly out at the insane but wonderful and amazing landscape, and ignoring my guide. She'd called herself a ranger. That, plus system, meant a lot of possibilities I hadn't considered before. I mean, since going through the portal, I totally forgot I was here to do a job. What kind of jobs are there? You're a ranger. Is that a special character class?
She gasped.
I guess the academy isn't going to go over Chargen. Sorry, Christopher. We'll have to do it together. The way she'd said the words do it had been suggestive, or I was just imagining things, talking to a beautiful girl? She could be messing with me. I took several looks over Regina as she hefted the hiking pack up onto her back again. She was wearing a pleated skirt that came down just below mid-thigh, and stockings. Both had been brown in color, the skirt a plaid pattern, but they were now splashed with magical color as well. Green vine designs and flowers now twined around her toned legs. The chest strap she clipped right below an excellent pair of breasts. The top 2 buttons of her top had come open at some point, showing me glimpses of collarbone and the color-shifting glittery freckles all over her body. It led to a deep well of cleavage I definitely stared at for too long. By the time I glanced up, she was grinning down at me. "Say character creation," she instructed, and I did. My vision filled with a huge blue rectangular screen, just like before after I'd woken up from surviving the touch of the flower god. The chunky 8-bit letters now read, "Please select a name," and Christopher Fletcher had already been entered there.
Below that was a keyboard.
"You need help?" she asked, sounding closer than before. "I have done this before in games. Don't pick a dumb name, like Shadow Dude Superkiller, or Ladies Man 69. The other Academy students will bully the hecky becky out of you." I laughed. "I can just go with my regular name, I guess? If you want me to advise, you just said reveal character sheet, and it will show anyone else nearby." I wanted to, but I did want to prove that I wasn't an idiot. She already had reason to doubt my intelligence. Plus, she wouldn't know that I got a special bonus from touching the flower god. For some reason, I didn't want to show off that I knew everything about all the flowers in the world. It wasn't that her knowing it might emasculate me. I didn't give a shiz about machismo. After all, I'd gotten a free pass out of gym class all through middle and high school. I didn't know whether the power was typical or unusual, whether it was good or bad, and whether she had a similar thing or not. If she didn't have one, she might march off and put herself in danger to grab one, and I wasn't going to endanger her life like that. "It's okay," I said, and accepted my plain old name. I could go by Fletcher. It was cooler than Christopher, and I could also go by Chris. The screen then showed me 5 basic stats: affinity, durability, ingenuity, likability, and physicality. Each had a numerical value. Affinity 0. Durability 3. Ingenuity 4. Likability 2. Physicality 1. I was surprised at the durability score. I hadn't thought of myself as someone who could suffer a lot of punishment, but when I moved my finger over the word, it explained durability was for mental and physical fortitude. Beneath the stats were the words, "Please place 5 additional stat points," followed by unspent free points. 6. The +1 free stat level had come from the contact with the flower god. Affinity. "It's for magic beings and gods," she said. "A higher score makes you more magical."
Got it.
"You're going to get a token for each of your stat points every time you level up," Regina said, though she couldn't see what I was looking at. "But here's the thing, your base attributes aren't really going to change. You'll get 1 point every 4 to 6 levels." All of them seemed valuable, but I immediately put a point in physicality. Nothing happened, though I'd been hoping it would heal up my legs and give me big muscles. And maybe those washboard abs, and the lines down the sides of my abs, the ones they called cum gutters. Sadly, nothing like that happened. I then considered that the system had given me a likability of 1 before I met the flower god. That was no good. I boosted it by 2, on par with my ingenuity. The last 2 points I put in affinity, so I could have some inkling of what was happening with magic. Finally, the game told me I had started off smart, and I wanted to keep it that way. I put the free stat point into ingenuity. If I knew anything about games, it was that the early levels were going to be easy, and I'd earn dozens of levels before the inevitable slowdown. When the game asked me if I was sure about these choices, I pressed the confirm button. My new stats read like this: Affinity 2. Durability 3. Ingenuity 5. Likability 4. Physicality 2. Congratulations. The window now told me. You have gained 2 affinity tokens, 3 durability tokens, 5 ingenuity tokens, 4 likability tokens, and 2 physicality tokens. Now each of my stats had a little readout beside it: 2 halves for affinity, 3/3 for durability, and so on. Beneath all that, it read free tokens 6/6. You have not chosen a class. Would you like to choose a class? I don't want to choose a class though, do I? Let's hold off on the class until you're into the academy and they know where to put you. Cocking her head, she regarded me with an easy smile. You catch on real fast, huh? I shrugged, unsure whether or not I was slow in asking all these questions or not. How many people came through, and how often? How many of those died? And how often? What was the academy like? When would I get to choose a Nakamoman? Would I get to engineer my own somehow? Would there just be like 3 choices and I'd have to settle for one? What was I expected to do over here? I sort of got that Dick Johnson hadn't wanted to spoil the magical fun of entering this place, but he could have prepared me with a job description at least. I wasn't about to get answers for any of these questions right away. It wasn't even vital that they get answered today, or this week. I was just swirling all around in my brain. Gods.
Magic. System. Monsters. It was a lot. She grinned. Let's go take a rest. There's no rule we have to get to the city in any sort of hurry, and I feel like we've hit our danger quota for the month, so I don't expect any other trouble. Really? What about predators? She laughed. Most stuff here just eats magic. And since we're not magically rich, they don't bother with us. Oh, that's good. Yeah, you'll get your daily pill and you'll take it. That stops us from turning into monsters. I froze, and once again she threw back her head and laughed. Sheesh, I'm sorry, Christopher. I keep adding stuff on here. Look, the pill keeps us from overloading on magic and changing into magical beings. Every living thing attracts some magic, right? And if that process goes on too long, you'll, I guess, be part of the food chain. It's never happened to anyone I know, because we take our pills every day. Right. I've been here for going on 6 months, and no problems turning into a magical creature, then being eaten by a hungry boulder. Sorry for scaring you. She chuckled, and I joined in. She gestured toward a boogie tree, one of the ones with enormous green spheres instead of leaves. A closer look at it revealed a big dopey grin with 2 knots for eyes. That grin broadened as we approached. Is this thing a Nakamamon? It's 90% plant, I guess, and the rest creature. I'm not a researcher, so I couldn't say what they've got in terms of brains, but they all seem pretty chill and happy. In fact, they love to be climbed. She took off, climbing the tree, while below I was going to ask Regina about all of this when I peered up into the tree's branches and stopped, mouth hanging open. Regina had taken off the hiking pack when we reached the tree, and now hunkered on a strong branch. Her feet perched on the branch, but the rest of her hung over in plain view. Either she had taken off her panties when I wasn't looking, or she hadn't been wearing any the whole time. I could see straight up her pleated skirt and past the stockings. They were only thigh-highs. She was on full display right above me. It was mesmerizing. She was grinning down at me, with a knowing smile. You coming up? I'm sure she could see the confusion, embarrassment, the amazement and the lust all written on my face. I tore my eyes away from her nether region, the first I'd seen in the light of day since a long time. Was she teasing me? She had to be. The arousal warred with the shame of knowing she was just messing with me. I'd be shot down in a heartbeat. I can't, my legs are. She knew my legs were garbage. She'd been carrying half my supplies for several hours. Give it a shot, she said, all encouragement and no hint of superiority. You might be surprised. There was one branch I could grab onto. It actually lowered a little so I could heft myself up. I silently thanked the tree creature. Growing up with messed up legs generally meant my upper body did a lot of compensating, so I did have a bit of muscles in the arms, chest and shoulders. Pulling myself up wasn't too difficult, but getting my legs under me was uncomfortable, then when I didn't move, painful. Below us, Tweedle D frolicked around happily, yipping and waving his several tails. Eventually he made his way over to a sunny spot and sprawled out. Regina had reached down, not far away, and was playing with herself. The contrast between the stockings and her skin was mesmerizing. The way her freckles sparkled in the shade of this weird tree was incredibly cute. Her eyes were glowing literally, and if I had to guess, her hair had grown out a good 3 inches in the last 3 hours. The thick reddish locks framed her face and made her look all the cuter. Okay. The math went through my head instantly. If I didn't go up there was absolutely no chance of me getting laid. If I did go up there, the chance existed. She had already provided me with what I figured was a lot of fat material if I got shot down. And if everything worked out, she and I could have some sexcapades anytime she returned to the city while I was in the academy. You coming up, new guy? Her voice had changed. It was huskier, thick with need. When I went to climb up onto the next branch, the tree again adjusted the next branch so I could get at it easier. Still, my legs didn't like this at all, and complained when I got up from my crouch. Physicality check. You do not have the associated skill for this check. This check is moderate difficulty. Would you like to spend 2 tokens for an automatic success? Total tokens, 2 physicality and 6 free tokens. I reached out and tapped at the big Y floating in the window in front of my face, but it wasn't necessary. My intent, or reaching toward it, were enough. The window disappeared and -2 tokens floated up from the bottom of my vision in huge, 8-bit blocky letters. Right before power flooded into my body, 2 enormous coins sprang into being in front of me. Both were similar to the coin I'd been given by Dick Johnson, thick, a good 3 inches across, but where Dick's coin had a fairy on one side, this one had the silhouette of a bodybuilder embossed on it, from the waist up at least. The faceless little guy held beefy arms up, mid-flex. The other side,
because the coins were slowly rotating in the air, showed this same henge behind the trees, and the mountains behind the henge. They rotated for several moments before disappearing into a burst of rainbow energy. That energy coursed into me. I felt indestructible. The condition was only temporary, it turned out, because a small circle sprang to life in the corner of my vision and immediately turned into a tiny green circle, with an expanding sliver of red like a pie chart. It was a timer, ticking quickly down towards 0. So of course I did what I had to do, climb the tree towards Regina. I did so in a blur of movement, grinning the whole way. She had only been 2 more branches up, but the climb wasn't easy. She was on a thick branch and reclining against one of the tree's gigantic ball leaves spread eagle. Still, it was terrifying. "Get over here," she told me, and I obeyed. The timer for physicality tokens rapidly wound down, but she had moved onto the gigantic leaf sphere and I climbed on after her. I marveled at the spongy feel of the big green ball, and the scent of Regina's arousal. I could smell it, something I hadn't thought possible. She smelled natural and wild, a mixture of some different herbs. I couldn't place the one, and it felt like it kept shifting: mint, dill, rosemary, basil, lavender, and others. A lazy smile spread over her face. "I thought you might not make it." "I had to," I said. Her lazy smile spread. "You know anything about eating at the Y?" This is Christopher freaking the F out. I was loath to confess to this gorgeous, glittering beauty that I didn't know anything about the female body. I'd spent a lot of years being bitter about this fact, but then mostly I just accepted that girls didn't want a broken man, and moved on to different aspects of life. I had won the middle school spelling bee. Take that, guys who had had sex. "Hey," she said, when I was halfway into telling her my whole life story. "Hey. Don't worry about it, okay? Just tell me I'm pretty." "You are fluffing gorgeous," I breathed. Like 1,000 miles out of my league. She was hardly supermodel beautiful, but she was fit, smiling, and she was glowing with literal magic. She grinned and kissed me on the nose. "Charm a girl's panties off, why don'tcha?" She wasn't wearing any. I didn't mention it. Instead I breathed, "I feel like I won the lottery." The big leaf ball was soft, squishy, and full of water, and felt like memory foam. She had no problem reclining back into it and sinking in a couple of inches. I reached out a hand toward Regina, who immediately grasped it and led me toward her thigh. Gob man, she was soft, smooth and cool to the touch. Just that initial contact, her hands on mine and then mine on this expanse of skin, was enough to get me throbbing, painfully hard in my pants. "Touch anywhere you want," she murmured. Her voice was already heavy with arousal and need, and she did the touching by herself, while I got acquainted with all the different places on her. Although my instinct was to just sit there gaping at her, I knew this might be my first and last chance to be with a woman. So I ran both hands up and down her thighs, loving the contrast between her soft skin and the silky material of her stockings. Then I started massaging her calf muscles and up over her thighs. Just running my hands over her taut muscles as hard as I thought I could get away with, then squeezing. She groaned. That's good?" Yeah. Do my feet." She put her stocking-covered foot on my chest and I proceeded to run my fingers up and down over every bit. The whole time, I couldn't take my eyes off the junction of her thighs. She was running 2 fingers down her slit, sometimes working in small, fast circles, other times just massaging like I was doing. Up and down, peekaboo. I'd only seen foot massages in movies and porn, but I tried to make it as nice as I could. Regina's eyes slowly closed and she threw her head back, moaning appreciatively. Whether it was from my massage or her own hand I couldn't tell. Eventually she put her other foot up on my chest, then stopped and rolled the stocking down her leg, removed it, and gave me the foot back. I got right to work, loving the warmth and softness of her body. I then noticed her other foot was sliding up my thigh and tickling against my cock. Her eyes were closed and she was hard at work on herself, so maybe she didn't notice. It was possible I was just being used as a toy for her pleasure, but this was the most experience I'd had in my 20 years of life on this earth. It was definitely my first public encounter. Very arousing by itself. So while I watched her fingers sliding over her, and her foot sliding over me, I worked on her foot with both thumbs, learning every bit of what was what, and which parts made her go with regularity. Turns out, I didn't need to worry about that. "Right there," she murmured. "Right there, yeah, yeewa." I kept doing that, both thumbs into the arch in slow, rotating circles. Her lips parted and she mumbled that she was about to come. "I want to lick it," I blurted. It was through clenched teeth that she said, "Get down here, stud." I got down, caressing one leg still in a stocking, the other bare, and scooted up to get my tongue on her open slit. She humped her butt up and down, so all I had to do was stick out my tongue. Feet rested onto my back now, and I inhaled the intoxicating scent. I could have come right then and there, but I was too focused on the sight and smell and taste in front of me. She was delicious. This, I would learn, was the magic. She was buttery and tasty, and I lapped at her. She smelled buttery, too, like a croissant. She still continued to fondle herself, work her clit, fingers bumping my nose. I didn't care. I just licked and licked at everything I could. Oh guh. She arched her back and shoved her midsection down into me. I got a flood of that buttery flavor, so I pushed my tongue into her as far as I could go. She rewarded me with a shrill squeal of pleasure, and her thighs convulsing against my ears. One hand was also clutching at my hair. Wait, she panted, stop. I didn't want to, but it was necessary to follow instructions. After all, she was the guide and I was the newbie in this world. In reality, I told myself that this was her show and she could run it how she wanted. I was just a sex toy if she wanted to use me like one. Although I had no real idea what she was thinking in wanting to do this with me, I wasn't going to stop her and be like, aren't you capable of finding a guy who can fuck you senseless? Whatever this was, I wanted it again, though I had a feeling it was a one-time thing. She tapped the space beside her, so I settled down and laid there. After a few more moments of shaky breath and composure, she sighed contentedly, slipped off the other stocking, and rolled over to put her head in the crook of my shoulder, draping one arm and leg over my body. My very stiff body. Her leg slowly moved up, and then down, sliding over my crotch. She was the picture of contentment, eyes closed, tiny smile teasing her lips, total relaxation. All except her leg sliding back up and her calf muscle sliding back up over my dick. That was really nice, she purred in my ear. Yeah. It was. I liked it when you got assertive. I mulled this over. I wanted a lot of things. But they all boiled down to the same thing. The question was whether or not I could force myself to say the words. Indecision and terror gripped me. It was laughable. Here was a girl who just showed me her everything, gave me her feet and legs to massage, and let me stick my tongue up in her. She would have sex with me. But another part of me still screamed that it was a trap, that she was going to turn me down and laugh at how insulted they were at the prospect. Just like Jamie Riley had done, just like Jessica Kanoski had done, just like Stephanie Kildare had done. And none of those girls had been anywhere near as hot as Regina. After some more indecision time, she just let out a soft and sleepy cooing noise. It's all right. I want. I want you. What do you want exactly? She teased. Her breath was on my neck. Deep breath, Chris, I told myself. You can do this. I want to have sex with you. She sat straight up, eyes full of mischief, grinning oddly. Was this the other shoe dropping? I held my breath in case the cruel laughter came out now. She swung one leg over and my boner actually came into contact with her bare pussy. What a coincidence. I also want to have sex with you. Actually, first I'm going to give you the best blowjob of your life, and then PFF you're what, 22? 20. She grinned. Never correct a girl who gives you a couple extra years, until you're at least 40. Right. Anyway, I'm sure you can get it up again. Then we'll have sex. Maybe twice. I lasted, somehow, 5 whole minutes. Now, I don't know what your stamina was like when you were a virgin, or when you were 20 for that matter, but I only lasted 5 minutes because Regina was really good at her job. She freed up my erection and followed this by grinning greedily up at me. I could just about see sparkles in her eyes. Oh Christopher, I can't believe we've been friends for almost a full day and I haven't had this inside me. She quickly took me into her mouth and expertly massaged me while removing my clothing, staring up at me the whole time. I would have just blasted off right there if she hadn't pulled off and grabbed on. Girthy, she muttered. And pretty long. I am gonna get some mileage out of this bad boy. She licked at it, causing me to groan. I resolved right then and there to keep hold of every moment of this encounter mentally, so I could replay it whenever I was feeling lonely. Regina popped the head into her mouth once again and pumped several more times, then smiled at the sounds she was forcing out of me. It was like she had a direct line to my orgasm, and she was stopping just before the finish line. This went on for some time, with her caressing my balls, slowly jacking my cock, and sucking on it. She kept up the soft stream of compliments the whole time, telling me she liked the head, this baby was going to rearrange her insides, and she couldn't wait to feel it all the way up to her diaphragm. After tickling my sack with her fingernails, she gave it a long suck, then whipped her shirt and bra off. Now she only had on the pleated skirt, and she soon stood with her back to me, shimmied out of it, and tossed it out of the tree like no big deal. Do you want, she asked, and lowered her midsection down onto mine with this seductive tone that nearly made me blast off in her hand. Do you want to put it in me?
Why yeah. I do, I managed.
First you gotta come for me, she said, and lowered her body down mine, pressing it against the bottom of my cock and sliding downward. Up her midsection, past her belly button and ribs. She stopped with it nestled between her breasts and pushed them together. Maybe you can try this next. With that, she pushed them together around my cock. She wasn't massively endowed, but they were enough to form a channel of pillowy softness.
Go on, she whispered.
Funk my tits, Chris. I did, moaning and groaning like she was killing me.
It felt like she was.
Again, I gazed down and got every detail. I didn't know if this would be the only time with Regina, the beginning of a long dry spell, but I was going to use this encounter for years to come. I memorized the way my cock appeared and disappeared down into her cleavage, her pointed little tongue reaching down to get at the bead of precum she found, and the gleam of her perfect teeth when she glanced up at me and grinned. Finally, on the downstroke, she let go of her tits. Taking my whole cock into her mouth, she sucked hard. That was the end of resistance for me. I erupted with a shout. It was enough that I triggered her gag reflex, and she ended up coughing. My seed went dripping out of her mouth, but she swallowed before dipping back down and licking the rest up. Holy shift, I mumbled over and over again.
Holy shift.
You came a lot, she said, wiping her mouth with a thumb and sucking the rest off her lips.
Her tone grew hungry again.
And you're still hard. A moment later she'd straddled me again, and I could plainly see her glistening pussy ready to swallow me whole.
Oh wow, I said. Pay attention.
She went so slowly, I saw literally every detail. Every bit of her enveloping me, even as the overwhelming sensations and the incredible tightness swallowed me up, I catalogued every microscopic event. Finally, she was sitting on my thighs, hands on my chest, unmoving.
You okay?
I have a confession, she said through clenched teeth. More a hiss, actually. I've never done this either.
And you're big.
I'm just gonna sit here and let my pussy get used to the size.
Okay.
When you've just been handed the best gift in the world, you don't ask for a gift receipt. Or hell, you don't go talking back to the gift giver. When she moved, there was a new wave of pleasure, and I looked down to see my dick reappearing, coated with a thin sheen of blood. Yeah, she said, and sank back down. Her eyes fluttered closed and both of us let out mirror groans of bliss. This was the best day of my life.
I hadn't died, and now.
I guess I could? Does it hurt?
I asked. A little.
Another few strokes and it was clear it didn't hurt any longer. She was shaking and shuddering, telling me how great it felt. It was so deep inside her, she said. It was really fluffing big. She came just as I was about to tell her I was feeling that familiar rise.
I told her.
She'd gotten one hand on her clit, massaged it all of 3 times, and collapsed down onto me, shaking like she had the first time with her thighs on my head. With no idea what to do instead, I grabbed 2 big handfuls of Regina's plump ass, pulling her up so I could fuck upwards from below. All the while I kept telling her that I was gonna. In one lightning movement she got up off me and sank down to her knees again, this time taking the whole load on her face. I was flat out astonished at the amount for one, and the fact that she would do this kind of thing. I painted her face and she moved around, eyes closed, so she could get as much of her face covered as possible. She didn't seem to know what to do with all of it. Her eyes darted to my face, then around at all the nothing we had available, then back at me. Finally, with nowhere else to put it, she scooped it onto her fingers and into her mouth. Finally, after collapsing down onto the pillowy soft green bulb next to me, she snuggled up into my shoulder again. I put an arm around her and marveled at the softness of her skin and body. It just wasn't possible to stop stroking her or squeezing this or that part. You must think I'm such a slew. She got caught up on the word slut, and not wanting to swear turned it into sludge. I laughed. I don't think you're a sludge. This is the first time I got to escort a single new hire. And you were so cute. And then you anyway this isn't. I'm not normally like this. That's all right, I told her, and continued hefting up both her breasts, one after another, then tracing the outlines of her nipples with my fingers. She sighed contentedly and got a handful of my junk. That was pretty fussing great. I'm so glad you liked it, I told her. You were amazing. Regina smiled indulgently at me, down at my already stirring cock, and back up at me once more. She then proceeded to teach me all about a woman's body. And use me for her own pleasure. I spent more time touching and exploring in that single afternoon than in the entire rest of my Earth life. We didn't just do it once more after that. This is Christopher making a core memory. I received, and this is Rich, a new achievement. Achievement, first sexual experience. Someone got lucky, didn't he? Well, congratulations on your first. May it be the first of many. Reward, plus 1 free attribute rank and associated token. Rather than spend that, I just grinned at it like a fool. It seemed like I would need a job before I knew what sort of attributes I should be specializing in. Though it seemed like I'd already blown that load. The next few hours included mostly Regina telling me about her time here. It was difficult to map out this world, because things were constantly springing into being and shifting around. Luckily, her ranger skills and special abilities gave her an innate sense of direction, and an ability to survive out in the wilderness. She had only been an employee of the company that also now employed me for a few months, and after her first month in the academy, she'd gotten her job, her skill set, and actual paid assignments, to ferry folks to and from the portal. She didn't know why the portal didn't open directly on the castle, but told me that the distance between portal and the stronghold had been growing. She shrugged as if it was normal for towns to just slide around the map. I had a lot to learn about this world, and although I really liked being around Regina, she wasn't the person to teach me. She kept getting tangential, going off into the weeds about this or that Nakamaman she discovered outranging during her academy times. A squid-like creature that had the same kind of camouflage as cuttlefish and octopus but spread confusion instead of ink when it was threatened. A humanoid chain of water droplets and bubbles roaming the countryside, some 10 or 12 feet tall. And the gods, she described a swarm of tiny lights, a thing like a mouse but with galaxies instead of eyes, and then a blanket that covered a good third of the sky some nights around twilight. Speaking of which, she grabbed onto my hand and massaged it a little, then squinted at it. I thought there might be, yes, look. I looked at where she was pointing, and saw something. A faint shape in the middle of my palm. The spiral petal shape of a rose. It wasn't a tattoo, but rather a darkened series of lines beneath my skin. Concentrating on it brought the blue window back up. Goddess of the meadow, has judged you worthy, and bestowed the gift of floral knowledge onto you. Goddess of the meadow, felt your compassion and willingness to help, though you knew not the way. Goddess of the meadow, has bestowed upon you plus 1 like ability. You gain 1 like ability token. Floral knowledge. You are a living encyclopedia for all flowers and the plants they are attached to. You are able to identify them by sight, smell, touch, or taste. This knowledge includes poisons, medicines, or herbs you might encounter. I blinked the message away, amazed. The goddess of the meadow just gave me all this knowledge. I knew false goat's beard. Poinsettia. Lilac. It was like everything Sarah had been excited about when I was a kid all came flooding back to me, but way more. I could tell that types of sage and how differently they tasted. Plus, I knew other flowers. Wind whispers and true grelets, and common numpties. It was so strange. Also, the word numpty sounded stupid and silly. From what I gathered, there were basically 4 types of jobs I might take up: ranging and guiding, like Regina, researching the Nakamaman and the gods and the magic and such, guarding and combat, or the job Mustache Face had, healing. There were probably more boring jobs out there, like bureaucracy and logistics, and I guess being a desk jockey would have been safe, but this place, who would want to be stuck behind a desk when you could go out and watch mountains float away? What are you going to do when you go back on R&R? She asked. Ha. You're going to have 3 months' worth of wages waiting for you. It's way more money than I could have ever hoped for. I mean, it's not this place, but we can basically do whatever we want. I gave her a considering I hadn't thought about it at all, honestly. It was my first day here. And now I wasn't sure how much I wanted to tell her about my family situation. My mom's cancer, my sister's impulsive behavior, or her terrible taste in men would only prompt pity. I didn't want that. Instead, I let silence do its work. She was going back to Earth soon, and she was geeked to get in some travel experience. I'm going to see the water like they show you in the movies. Like the Seychelles or Fiji. I'm going to get my scuba certification and take underwater photos and basically forget that people exist. No internet, no social media, nothing at all except maybe a couple glasses of wine watching the sunset on the water. I nodded. That sounds lovely. I think this place might break me on Earth though. What do you mean? I've seen a centipede flower nearly kill a guy, and I have a fox with flowers in its ears and tails. I don't think anything on Earth can compare to this. Yeah. She snorted and looked off at the mushrooms big enough to be apartment buildings, and the mountains beyond. She had more in mind but didn't want to share it with me. She'd already given me far more than I could reasonably expect. Practically the only thing she hadn't given me was anal, and I wasn't about to go asking after that, not when I just arrived here, just met her, just nearly died, and just lost my virginity. I guess we'd better get back on track, she said. Time to start earning what they're going to be paying you.
Oh.
I smacked myself upside the head. I'd just been having sex and lazy snuggle conversations while on the clock.
Whoops.
She tossed her bra and shirt out into the open air, and scrambled to make her way down the large branches in the nude. I watched her go before following after. Getting down, although terrifying, wasn't as hard as going up the tree. The window told me it was easy difficulty, and I could spend one physicality token for an automatic success, but I chanced doing the check without the requisite skill. It then told me I had scored a success, but barely. My legs still complained, but I was amazed to find they weren't as bad as I remembered from on Earth. I peered down at them. They didn't appear to be any different. The surgery scars were still there, along with the places where the bones had poked through. No gigantic swelling of muscle. Stick-thin legs, underdeveloped calf muscles, all the same.
Oh well, I told them.
Maybe one day. I paused to watch Regina slide the skirt up her legs and zip it up, then replace her bra and button her blouse back up. For some reason, it struck me as just as sexy as her being naked, possibly even more so. She noticed me watching and winked. "You're just standing there in the buff, my guy," she said, grinning. "I don't think my poor puss can handle another round.
I'm going to need some ice."
I quickly got into my boxers, then pulled on the rest of my clothes. By the time I was done, she had her stockings back on and adjusted. Tweedle D was also nuzzling her shoulder, and got some chin scritches just because.
After all, he was a treat.
"You're a good boy, aren't you, D?"
He yipped in response.
"You love the D," I told her, and she gave me a wicked grin. "I have another one I'm rather fond of," she told me, and I chuckled.
2.
The castle grew a lot larger as we approached. It didn't seem to make sense, being like a reflection in a pond. The bottom half was a perfect reflection of the top half, just upside down. It was the same way for the guard towers. Somehow it functioned, though it didn't really go into my brain how it should. I kept expecting some of them to fall out onto the grass below. Eventually the castle approached, and I saw a smattering of smaller houses and buildings also floating, and also mirror upside-down versions of themselves. Now it became clear that the castle was held down by a series of chains. The smaller buildings also. Some were mud and timber, others were stone, and still more were made of red and orange brick. The upside-down parts and the chains were both difficult to handle. "How do people get inside?"
I asked.
"You'll see," she said, grinning. "Let the magic happen. Surprises aren't all bad." I found at least one answer before we got there: a magic carpet lifted off the ground with people on it, too far away to see clearly. It approached the upside-down part of the castle, where a balcony would allow access to one of the very highest towers on the castle, in this case closest to the ground, and in an instant the rug flipped upside down. It landed, and the folk sitting on it, now upside down to me, stood and headed inside the castle. Another one involved a flying manta ray descending out of the sky. It swooped down in a large arc that suddenly took them into the opposite gravitational pull once they reached a certain point. It was carrying some 8 people, all seated comfortably, and there was room for more. There were others, another cloud bearing a person, a tiny tornado, and several more flying Nakamoman.
"Holy heckabaloo," he muttered. 3.
The guards from the nearest tower called down, and leapt down to meet them. Christopher thought they were going to land on a cool giant dragonfly or something, but instead he just landed in a perfect superhero crouch. 2 more guards landed at his sides a moment later. These 3 were huge, built like trucks, and it took me longer than I cared to admit to realize that one of them was a woman. They wore Spartan-style helmets and carried spears, round metal shields, and had short swords at their backs.
"Guns?" I asked.
"They don't work here," she said, and didn't elaborate. To be fair, the spear was rife with magic, having a spark that ran down from the tip through a vein of what looked like marbling, to the base of where it was connected to the haft. The shield, too, was embedded with gems that seemed to sparkle in a variety of colors. These were red, purple, and several shades of pink in between. "Let's have your name and ID," the guard said. "Ranger Regina Hampstead, sir," she said, and handed him a packet of papers sealed with wax. "I'm here on a guide and escort mission." The guard looked up at me. "I suppose you don't have any of the requisite paperwork."
I shrugged.
"Just arrived a few hours ago. What should I call you?"
"Sir." I wasn't military. I hoped not to be also.
The guy raked my figure up and down, pausing at my legs.
"Sure, kid. Sir is fine."
He won 0 points with me. The good news is that I'd had tons of experience with these kinds of people ever since my legs got broken and I got out of the hospital. I shrugged it off, reserving the right to dislike Blake, and holding out judgment on the rest of the guards here. Regina saw this, and her face twisted with anger. "Excuse you." The guard looked up from her papers, then back down at them. "Do I go take this up with command then?" she asked.
He snorted.
"Why would you do that? Christopher here is 20 years old. He's not a kid, and we don't do disrespect around here. How old are you again, Blake?" Blake's demeanor grew instantly dark. "Look, Hampstead, you do the ranging, I do the guarding. Get off my back." He swelled to even bigger than his already enormous form. This isn't like a guy puffing out his chest, either. His guard uniform tightened onto his obscenely bulging body. He literally got muscles that didn't formerly exist, his neck disappeared, and it was a good thing he was wearing an armored skirt, because he would have shredded through any pants he'd been wearing. The leather groaned as he grew. The hulking routine took time, long enough for me to realize Regina had no visible reaction to him doing whatever he was doing. "This ain't Earth, Blake," she said. "You don't pull that shiz here. And the super muscle routine doesn't work on me. I'm not intimidated. Now you going to apologize to our newbie here, or do I go talk to your boss?" Blake bared his teeth at her but said nothing. One of the other guards put a hand on his shoulder, and that seemed to do it. He deflated a bit, and glanced over at me. "Sorry, Christopher." "What?" I started, but didn't get that far. Regina stepped forward and stared intently up at his 8-foot, double-wide frame. "Not good enough." This time, Blake went Super Saiyan. Yellowish energy literally burst out around his feet and surrounded him in an aura. He was breathing heavily, teeth clenched, hands balling into fists and falling limp again and again. He looked like he needed a truck to bench press stat. "Last chance, Blake, apologize to the man." Blake turned and literally screamed in my face. He got down, opened a jaw that he nearly had to unhinge, and spittle flew out with a mighty roar. "Unknown check, you have been targeted by a special ability. You do not have the associated skill for this check. This check is very high difficulty. Would you like to spend 8 tokens to automatically succeed this check?" The urge to mentally click yes was almost overwhelming, but some tiny part of me decided against it. That would be all my free tokens and whatever other tokens that were left for my attributes. I knew I would need them. That meant choosing failure. Morale check, you have failed this check. Do you wish to spend 1 token to try again? If you fail again, the token will be lost.
"No," I growled.
Instantly, paralyzing fear swept over me. My knees buckled and I fell to my ass, scrambling backwards, into another one of the guards. I looked up and into the face of a weary female guard. "We're sorry about this, newbie," she said, and picked me up as though I was just a bag of groceries that needed putting away. Blake's got a bit of a temper. When I peered back at the source of my terror, Blake was gone. I saw a tiny speck of a person wreathed in a yellow flaming aura flying through the air. "He's also got the skills to be a serious danger," Regina said, "in a place like this. He is precisely the wrong sort of person to be working in a job like this." The lady guard grimaced. "Go ahead and report him." "You could go ahead and report him," the other male guard said, "or you could chalk his behavior up to extenuating circumstances, and trust that he's a good guy otherwise." He removed his helmet and shook out a head of curly brown hair, then stared at her with icy blue eyes that glowed with magic. Regina stared at the other guard for some time, then snorted in derision. "Come on, Chris, let's get out of here before this whole place goes up in hypocritical flames."
She stalked off.
"Oh, I thought it was Christopher," the other male guard yelled. "You giving him pet names on his first day in the Shire, huh?" I didn't know what was happening. I had to push myself pretty hard to keep up with her, which set my legs to aching something fierce. When she finally realized she had outpaced me, she stopped and tapped her foot, eye twitching. Tweedle D seemed to grasp her agitation and rubbed up against her leg. By the time I got there, she'd knelt down and had her hands buried in his fur. "What was that about?" I asked, out of breath. Regina sighed heavily, and kept her eyes downcast. "I'm sorry about that. I wish one of the other guards had been on rotation, but you had to meet Blake." "And Blake is?" "He was kind of not really my boyfriend for a hot second." This is Christopher rethinking his choices. As we made our way through the upside-down and right-side-up buildings, my mind raced. If that other guard put together, or even suspected, that I was Regina's lover and Blake was the ex, that big meathead might do something like put my face through the back of my head. I had no doubt that big dumb bastard could do it too. Regina took us directly to a travel platform, presented her papers, and we got astride a freakin' pterodactyl with coruscating stripes of energy running down its body and wings. Tiny pulses of light traveled down its stripes and fizzled out where the creature ended. I focused on that, rather than on my questions or Regina's fury. Tweedle D clearly didn't like the creature, or didn't like the idea of flying. He had to be coaxed up onto her lap. He curled around Regina's waist and whined pitifully the whole time. She calmed him with soft strokes of the fur. Once on the leather double saddle, the creature launched itself off the ground with powerful flaps of its wings, and brought us to the lower levels of the right side up portion of the mirror castle. We ended up on a docking platform specifically for flying creatures, since this portion of the castle was hovering over 100 feet in the air. I found the situation surreal, watching as upside-down means of flight swooped down towards the platforms directly below ours. Regina leaned back and slipped a hand onto my thigh. Ugh, I'm really sorry about what happened. And I wish there was another chance for us to have a little alone time.
It's not your fault, I said.
I hadn't even really blamed Blake. He was just the latest in a long line of assholes. And she was really placing her hand on the middle of my thigh, and sliding it higher. My body did the thing all 20-year-olds did, it reacted. You don't quite understand, violence isn't allowed here. Violence isn't allowed? I really didn't understand. She shook her head and slid her hand up my thigh. Not allowed. The natives don't do it. Aren't even capable of doing it. This rendered me speechless. Here we had Blake, super strongman and glowing super scion douche canoe with his intimidation shriek and his acting like a fucking toddler, and the natives couldn't even defend themselves? Or rather, why were there guards if violence wasn't allowed? We landed the pterodactyl creature with a head shaped more like a tyrannosaur, and in my periphery I noted that the number of Nakamoman I'd encountered had risen to 2. This one, the system notified me, was called? Which was unhelpful. I chuckled at it, and tried to get my body back under my control. I was going to meet with officials who would decide my fate here in this new world, and I needed to make a good impression on them. Tweedle D was more than happy to take his leave of the creature, leaping free and bounding all around the landing platform with his tongue lolling. I watched him with fondness, hoping to see as much of Regina and Tweedle D as possible. Regina had gone stiff, her expression thunderous. I'm going to leave you off at intake, Regina said curtly. She was clearly still upset about how the situation with Blake had gone. Oh, he said. Is this goodbye then? She pulled up short in the middle of leaving, and turned back to me. She went to reach for me, but stopped herself, which caused me to glow warmly in the middle of his chest. I'm not sure. I may be on the team to escort you to your assignment. We'll see. She glanced around before finally mustering up the courage to reach out and squeeze my hand, right where a flowery shape had been indelibly etched. Hopefully I'll see you again, Christopher. Call me Fletcher, I told her, and she grinned. I'll see you later. With that, she was off. The attendant responsible for the flying creature smiled down at me. He was a giant of a man, easily 6.5 feet. First day, huh? I nodded. You got that right, this place, it's amazing. The corner of his mouth quirked up, and he gazed around. From up here it was easy to see a lot further than before, and the vista was still just as glorious as it had been before, imposing mountains stabbing up at a sky full of coruscating colors, gigantic mushrooms looking like they could feed thousands, and trees that didn't seem to give a shit where the sun was. Off in one direction, for the first time, I saw the shoreline stretching off in both directions for ages. Get used to it, son, the older man said. Could I ask you a question? I asked, and he just chuckled. I guess I already have. What's your Nakamoman called? I named her Iris, he said. Goddess of rainbows. She's a glimmerdactyl. So clearly we've been naming all these creatures, huh? He nodded. Come on, I'll show you the way. Welcome to intake, by the way. I'm Russ, and you're Christopher Fletcher. Odd to have a cohort of one, but we're used to odd here. I shook the hulking man's hand and asked him to call me Chris, or Fletcher. He had an absolutely crushing grip, but the warmth coming off him told me it was accidental. He ate up the distance leading me down the well-lit hallways to the office, and only belatedly realized I wasn't keeping up. He chuckled. I gotta tell you, Fletcher, I feel like a younger man in here. Would you believe when I got in here, I was 67 years old and basically retired? You don't look a day over 65, I told him, grinning. He actually looked maybe 40, though I was 20 and everybody over 40 looked just plain old. He threw back his head and guffawed loudly, instantly getting my fairly lame joke. 65. Hell, I used to be almost completely bald. Had one of those horrible strips of hair that runs from ear to ear. Shudder to think, eh? He ran a hand through his hair. Despite having a receding hairline, he had a full head of salt and pepper hair. Hell, it was all white too. And I couldn't keep this go-doffel paunch off. He went to grab onto a gut that wasn't there, and grinned at me. And the energy I got back, just setting foot here. I tell you what, if they don't kick me out, I'm never going back. That's great, I said, and gave him the most sincere smile I could muster. He shook his head and continued chuckling.
65.
Son, I get why Dick got you in here so fast. I like you.
Thank you, sir.
You can call me Russ, he said. After all, I feel like you look. I may look like a sir, but I don't feel it.
I grinned.
Well, Russ, just tell me where to go and who to talk to, and I'll get out of your very thick hair.
Nah, he said. I'm Intake.
Intake Russ, that's what they call him. Good old Intake Russ, with his invisible flab and full head of hair on his bald head, I said, and he guffawed again. There was some paperwork, or rather, there was some stonework. He had me sign a wet slab of clay, after reading through the fine print carefully. This was identical to the contract I'd already signed on Earth, which included a spot for my parents' names as beneficiaries in case I ended up ended. Like having my life sucked out by a corrupted god. I signed with a stylus, and he brought the tablet out to his glimmerdactyl, who dutifully breathed fire on it until the tablet was totally baked through. What's next? I asked, though by now I was hoping to get a bit of shut-eye. The day had been long hard, and I was spent. Let's get you to the academy, get some grub in you for dinner, and get you a place to sleep. Then academy begins in the morning. He rummaged in his desk and brought out a small vial of bright yellow liquid with a stopper. The liquid was opaque, so it definitely wasn't that I thought it might be. In the meantime, take this if you please. I cast a worried glance at it, but the system stuff, the burst of invigoration from the physicality tokens and the existence of magic all helped to clear my mind. This was just a magic potion of some kind. I popped the stopper off and drank quickly. The flavor was so weird. Like 17 different flavors, all shifting in and out of each other. It went from one to the next rapidly, almost faster than my tongue could process. You have imbibed stamina potion. The huge blue window told me in that same blocky 8-bit font. Your stamina has been restored to full. Your stamina has been restored beyond full. The excess will be kept in reserve until you wake. A new thing I hadn't noticed before appeared, a yellow-green bar at the top of my periphery, near a very short red and an even shorter blue bar. The yellow bar was easily 3 times longer than the red one, and filled with glowing yellow light as I watched. It then hit the end of the bar, and an even stronger glow erupted as the bar extended past where it had before. I saw the demarcation line, where the bar typically ended. It kept going until it was maybe 50% of the original. And here's the thing, I felt amazing. Not jittery and on edge like I just had a coffee, but fully awake and alert, like I just had the best sleep of my life and woke up on a thick mattress and a down pillow. I gaped at Russ, who was bent over, hands on knees and laughing until he couldn't make even tiny wheezes of laughter.
Are you okay?
He held a hand out and shook his head, then fell back on his butt laughing. You shoulda seen your face. He sent himself off into another fit of laughter. I had to laugh too, wondering what I looked like. Once he was done with his paroxysm, I helped him off the floor and listened to him periodically burst out laughing.
Who, he said. I can't even, he.
Every time we get a new bee. I'm glad I think, I said unsure. He didn't seem to be making fun of me. This was a very different experience than every interaction I'd had with people, ever since the accident. No pity, no overprotective mothering, and certainly no sneering barbs of cruelty. Obviously I liked it here, but now I liked Russ.
A lot. Oh, you are, and so am I.
Just keep that childlike feeling of wonder and awe, son.
Don't lose that. You'll be better for it. All right, I told him.
Now that I had a pep in my step, it was quick going to reach the academy. This was across the whole length of the castle, and then below into the upside down. At one point, we were headed down the stairs, and then Russ had us take a strange sideways step here, and then we were just upside down. People passed us, and it was mind-boggling to watch them flip around on the stairwell, then be subject to the other gravity after passing us. Just ignore it, I told myself.
It'll be fine.
Can't handle a little Escher-esque backwards gravity, can we? Russ cackled again, then shook his head, holding his sides. I have the best job. The academy wasn't big. It was no Frogwort school of magic and whatnot, that's for sure. We approached large double doors, and that felt pretty similar, but upon opening them, it was basically one big hall with 4 rooms, arranged 2 on either side. 3 were classrooms, and 1 was the office.
The end.
Expect to be sorted into a house?
Russ asked. Kind of. Well, you can be a flufflehump, he said. We all are.
Though I guess some of us are wise owls.
I thought about Blake. I've got a question for you, Russ. Unrelated.
What's with the rule on violence?
He stopped short. Huh?
What makes you bring that up? There are guards all over the place, but no violence allowed? If there's no violence, then why have guards in the first place? He squinted off into the corner of the academy. It's a chicken or egg situation, see? If we've got no protection and something dangerous happens, we're toast.
I nodded.
But if you have protectors, you're more likely to end up with a warlord. You're not wrong. It's part of the reason why the guards here only serve for a maximum of 3 weeks before getting rest and relaxation back on Earth, for weeks at a time. They're not allowed to have jobs back on Earth, and especially not jobs like security or bouncer, or professional fighters. And anybody who ends up with a criminal record is uninvited. I raised my eyebrows. There's no violence here, he said, period. The creatures here didn't even know what it was until we showed up. They still don't, and that's the way we're aiming to keep it.
Catch me.
I guess I do. Anyone with enough power could do some serious damage if they wanted to, Russ said. That made a lot of sense. Russ and I entered the academy section of the upside-down part of the castle. He turned and entered the first of the rooms he came across, where a middle-aged woman was writing with a quill onto paper. On her shoulder, a winged snake was perched, with scales that seemed blue at first. Those scales flipped over on themselves as we approached, and became a brilliant striped pattern in red, white and yellow, like the flames from Russ's Nakamoman. It regarded us with intelligent eyes. The woman, frowning, scrunched the paper up into a ball and threw it into a metal wastebasket. I guess we really are using cuneiform, as it turns out, she said, not looking up. Every single official communication is going to have to be baked into the bloody clay like it's 3,000 bloody years ago.
Russell?
What brings you? Oh, you have someone, don't you? She finally seemed to recognize that I was there. Headmistress, Russ said, with a little too much inflection, this is Christopher Fletcher, who prefers to be called Fletcher. Fletcher, this is Headmistress Alexandra Jenkins, but she likes to be called Allie. You know, she'll help you figure out the type of job that's up your alley.
The woman stood.
She was very, very tall. Taller than Russ, and far taller than me. You are aware that joke sounds very much like an innuendo, do you not? Several, in fact.
Russ shrugged.
And yet you don't stop me from making it. Let's get young Fletcher here a place to store his things for the night, a meal, and then we'll let him bathe in the sights for a day or two before we put him to work. Christopher Fletcher, that's right, she said, nodding. I received the notification from Dick Johnson about you last week. At Russ's snort, she turned a sharp glare his way. That is no way to treat our hiring department, Russell. Oh, come on, Allie, he's not here. We can slip in a little fun at him, can't we? He leaned toward me and poked an elbow into my ribs. Ain't that right, Fletcher? Dick Johnson can get the shaft just so long as we know we're joking and we're polite when he's around. Just the tip, you might say.
I grinned. Dick Johnson?
I like the guy. I think he's got quite a good head on his shoulders.
Russ chuckled.
He's a bit of a stiff, though.
He did seem quite excited, I replied.
Ejaculated his job offer before I could really understand what was happening. That is quite enough of that, Allie said. The man goes hard, he does, Russ said and chortled, then slapped a hand on my shoulder and nearly bowled me over.
All right.
I'll hand ya off to Allie. When she's done with ya, I'll be right outside and ready to take you to the mess. And it was in the moment after Russ left that I realized I was now in Allie's care, and I probably should have been kinder to Dick Johnson. This is Christopher burning with embarrassment but grinning like a fool anyhow. The confusion and hurt on my father's face crushed my insides. There what? I explained to him again that the specialists were going to be coming in the next day, to have another look at Mom's condition. They were going to make sure she had the best care available, and he wouldn't have to worry about the money anymore. Secretly, I hoped he'd start going back into work. I'd already exhausted my boss's patience with my moping around and feeling sorry for myself, but Dad had a good job at GM, designing their new line of cars and trucks. They had given him plenty of time away from work to handle getting Mom comfortable, then even more time to be by her side every day, and get his head back in order. But by now, even he was stretching the goodwill of the company. I knew he loved the work, and they really enjoyed him. He had friends there. Work and friends would both help him get through this. Just like the money for my new career as a whatever the hell I'd be doing. We need you here, Chris, he said.
I don't understand.
Where will you be going? I'd been instructed to tell him as little as possible. It's a research facility, up in northern Alaska. This wasn't, strictly speaking, a lie. The government agency that did this other world situation had a facility up in Alaska. He and Mom could really find it and visit it, if they moved heaven and hell to get in contact with me. And in the event of a serious emergency, the agency would transport me out there. And they won't have internet there?
I shook my head. I'm not sure.
They said there's a chance I would be cut off from the world, so I'm letting you know. From what I understand, I'll be setting up equipment way out. Like in polar bear country. So, sleeping in tents and growing a beard. I'd grow a beard the day pigs started doing calculus and quantum physics. It wasn't that I hated the idea of doing it, just that my genetics wouldn't allow it. The joke slid right off his haggard face and concerns. And why? I sighed and shrugged. Obviously for the money. I didn't want to tread on his pride. He was supposed to be the provider, but Mom's treatments had already crushed us financially. Sarah needed money. You guys could use some. It's the least I can do. Hell, I'd lived in their basement trying to make an extra buck off streaming. My father's gaze turned inward. That's kind of you, buddy, but it's not necessary. You don't have to do this just for us. I owed them more than I could say. Life, birthday parties, soccer practices, camping trips, and then all the consoles and video games I'd asked for over the years. I'm not, I said, believe me. I'm doing it for me. 1. I get plenty of money even after throwing a bunch at you and Sarah. 2. I get to go on an adventure. I'll see the aurora, I'll get to see the sun rotating around in a circle in the sky, or the sun won't even come up. I can't remember which one happens now. I laughed. Also, I want Sarah to realize that she needs to talk to you guys. And I hope you get to see your grandkids. His expression grew very complicated there, but only for a moment. The implication of what I'd said sank in. Grandkids? Did you say grandkids?
I nodded. She's pregnant. Again. Oh, he muttered. That's great.
That's amazing. The words didn't have all the punch and emotion they should have, but that was all right. As long as he was talking about Sarah in a positive way, that was good. He clearly had a lot more to say, but he wouldn't say it in front of me.
Look, I said.
Apparently this is the kind of environment people don't handle well, so I have to put a lot of books onto my e-reader, a whole bunch of songs onto my computer, and a whole bunch of movies onto my computer, and get ready to just be alone for a couple months. Then I'll be back on some R&R time, okay? These were almost all lies. I had been specifically told that all electronics would die on contact with the other world.
He nodded.
I've got to get ready.
Sure, buddy.
He blinked several times and rose.
Sure.
I already told Mom. I let the words hang in the air, along with the other implication.
She needed him.
Me leaving them money, and me leaving them, were going to push Dad back away from the abyss he'd been staring into, and back into her arms. I made for the stairs. I really did have a lot to pack.
Hey, he said.
When I turned, he had broken into a wide smile, and this time it looked like the reality of the situation had finally penetrated. He looked joyful for the first time in ages. You're amazing.
Thanks, Dad.
I'm proud of you. Now go get all your YouTubes downloaded and movies pirated and MP3s on your discs. I laughed, and headed through the kitchen, into the basement.
Now.
Allie towered over me a moment. She had blonde hair with threads of gray, but also threads of blue, green, and purple. She was wearing a typical pantsuit in gray material with tiny white pinstripes. The whole thing was skewing towards purple, with the magic in the air.
Mr. Fletcher, she said.
I'm pleased you could make it. However, you shouldn't immediately jump into Russ's inappropriate antics just because he fails to take anything seriously. Russ is pretty familiar with people here, I said.
Sorry about that.
It was infectious. I trailed off, feeling pretty lame.
Also embarrassed.
I had a sinking feeling this imperious woman could end my stay here after a single day if she wanted to, and there'd be nothing I could do about it. Goodbye huge pay increase. Goodbye helping out my sister and my parents. That won't be a problem, she said, and cracked a wide smile. Apparently my contrition was convincing. Russ is enjoying the same benefits all us old people are. She gestured to her hair. I have all the color back in my hair. And would you look at this? She pulled up the curtain of hair on one side, revealing a pointy ear.
I'm an elf. Whoa, I breathed. And you, she chuckled.
It looks like some of the projections were right. Let's get you a mirror and your first pill. The mirror showed that my face was turning colors. It looked a bit like I was a stained glass window, and each of the smaller window panes was a different color. Most were orange, but a few were yellow, red, or brown. In a few places dots had emerged, and I was once again reminded of a monarch butterfly. Could I ask why this is happening? Actually, I needed a lot more than that, but I was going to start there. Allie let out another rueful laugh, and took a glass container full of pills out of her desk. She retrieved one, followed by a tumbler filled with water for me to wash it down. In the meantime, I had a look down into the collar of my shirt. Yep, I had gone monarch, or rather stained glass, all the way down inside. And that wasn't all. The shirt I'd worn in here had been one of a few dress shirts I owned, a blue collar button down with short sleeves. The buttons had changed into those old-school toggle things, thick rope, wide button in the shape of an egg if you managed to squish it down and pull out the long end. The shirt itself had blossomed with color, too. In one place the color had leached out and left it a gray-white, while the extra color apparently migrated up my trunk and turned the soft blue into a purplish color. Nothing was untouched. The boxer shorts I'd packed were a riot of colors now. The material of all my socks had shifted slightly. Some were scratchier than before, while one of the pairs turned to a silky substance, possibly silk but no way to know. All the lettering on all the tags on every single piece of clothing I'd owned were now indecipherable. None of them were the same letters. It was like all the letters turned into tiny worms that wriggled around on the tags, and eventually froze back in place. It was so weird I couldn't help laugh over it. Yes, so, you will need to use this pill once a day. In an emergency you can ration them out to once per week, but if you are too far from your supply, you will need to return to base within a week of taking them. I blinked at her. What happens after a week? Allie smiled kindly at me. I am here as part of your employment, and as such I am obliged to tell you this. You not taking your pills will not allow you to claim hazard pay. This is a minor annoyance that, left untreated, will advance internally. We studied it initially, and found there were alterations to brain function. I don't want to scare you. We developed the pills to counteract these sorts of effects. The pills work, end of story. Nodding numbly, I let the reality sink in. Since you are here as an employee, currently drawing a salary, it is incumbent upon me to get you to a place where you can perform the tasks and duties of an employee as soon as possible. Class selection, I said. Did your guide brief you? Yes and no. I had an encounter with one of the corrupted gods, a goddess of the meadows. She nodded solemnly, but I caught the slight widening of her eyes and the way her hand automatically drifted up to her chest, over her heart. I had read that report, and I will say I'm quite pleased you weren't seriously or irreparably hurt. You are here, meaning neither your guide nor Russ saw a need to send you to the infirmary. I nodded. Of course, if you feel that you are in need of medical care, I'll take you there straight away. I considered telling her about the rose shape that now lived under the palm of my right hand, but decided against it. Instead I took my pill, washed it down with water that tasted slightly of sugar, and nodded to her. She decided it would be best to go through character generation, I told her. I picked my name, spent my attribute points, and got a bunch of tokens. She continued nodding, and rolled her hand over, a sign for me to continue. It seems the tokens are spent to accomplish tasks without trying to rely on skills and attributes. More nodding. I have a few questions, naturally. Of course. I then learned that she didn't know who set up the system, or if it was in place when she arrived. She did confirm that skills helped offset the need for tokens, and that my class would supply the skills. Then let's get you a class, she said, and pulled up an honest-to-goodness player's handbook, TM. It looked enough like the player's handbook I'd seen growing up that I squealed in delight and laughed. The production quality, graphics on the cover, and font choices were high enough quality to bring out the old tabletop role-player in me. Dick chose well, she muttered, smiling. You'll need Chapter 3, which is class selection. I flipped the hardcover book open, skipping Chapter 1, which was what is a role-playing game. And similar introductory material. Still, the illustrations on the book's interior showed me this wasn't just an employee handbook, but somebody's labor of love. Somebody's jokey labor of love. Did Russ make this? I asked, and skipped over Chapter 2, which covered the chargen I'd already gone through with Regina. Chapter 3 had a full-page illustration of an adventuring party, a bard, a cleric, a fighter, a ranger, and a wizard. All of them, however, had Nakamoman creatures with them. The ranger had a bear-sized porcupine made of wood, bark and twigs, while the bard had a glowing pink bird with 4 wings and long flowing tail feathers. It was absolutely enchanting, and I couldn't help but gasp in shock. There are more guys like Russ here than I'd care to imagine, she said with a sigh. And it looks like there's one more. I guess, I said, flipping through the next few pages. The base description of what classes were and what they did wasn't necessary. I had that stuff memorized from when I was a kid. After that, It went in alphabetical order: bard, followed by cleric. I didn't need to go further. I'll be one of these. Ali stared down at the picture of the healer holding a glowing hand against the torn leg of a fellow adventurer. She frowned a bit, then schooled her expression well. You haven't even read the description. Doesn't matter, I said. I wanted to do what Mustache Face had done. I wanted to save people and wounded creatures, and maybe even uncorrupt the corrupted gods like the goddess of the meadows. No way was I going to be a huge muscle-bound guardsman like Blake. Why they would choose to be guards in a place without violence made no sense to me. On the other hand, there was a very real problem here, with the gods of this world bleeding and dying, and I was going to be a part of that solution. I was already thinking beyond the job. You want to be a healer then, she said, with the unasked, is that your final answer hanging in the air? Yep. She nodded, resigned. It's not like we don't need more healers, she muttered. She wasn't going to try talking me out of it. You'll have to say class selection, and then follow the prompts you find there. If you have a choice to make, consult with me first. I said the words, and once more the large blue window appeared, full of blocky white text. Choose your class, was followed immediately by a triangle pointing at bard. Below that was cleric, then fighter, ranger, rogue, sorcerer, and wizard. I moved the triangle down so it was pointed at cleric and mentally pressed my assent. Are you sure? Y/N the prompt asked, and I once again confirmed my pick. A white light shone down from above, somehow cutting through both the right side up and the upside down sections of the castle. Pulses of pure white rained down around me, and the whole place filled with an antiseptic smell I associated with my mother's hospital room. The whole room grew brighter and brighter white, while energy swirled around me faster and faster, whipping my hair and clothes around, and throwing things off Ali's desk. When it subsided, she was smiling ruefully. I always forget to have them do that in the main hall. Would you kindly help me pick up some of this stuff? I chuckled and went to help her retrieve her books, papers, and paperweights. This is Christopher finally getting his job. Ali and I spent a good 15 minutes tidying up her office. She alternated between grumbling and laughing about forgetting the whirlwind that surrounded people when they chose their classes. Every single time, apparently, she forgot. She assured me there were no other things for her to counsel me on. Now that I had my class, it would be about getting a look at my skills and then raising them. The only warning she gave was not to go too fast right out of the gate. Go slow and easy. You're talking to a guy who reached out and touched a god, I thought, and definitely didn't say. I'd find out what she meant soon enough. In the meantime, she also gave me the player's handbook to look at. It wasn't long for this world. The illustrations were already being tampered with by the magical resonance suffusing the whole place. And it appeared that most of Chapter 1 was already altering itself into nonsense words, and turning the letters into more indecipherable gobbledygook. She promised to have some of the clay tablets sent in. These would explain more, and were much more resilient against magical interference than basic paper and ink. Then she sent a runner to grab my gear and escort me to my quarters to deposit all my stuff there, then head to dinner. The runner had a kind of ferret creature, or maybe an otter, made of multicolored inky stuff. The Nakamaman flowed through and around the runner's feet, never tripping him up. Sometimes it glanced at me with eyes of solid empty black that seemed to judge me. I was filled with questions, and the runner answered them with great big smiles, while he hopped around from one foot to another. His ink creature kept weaving this way and that in figure eights around his ankles. It turned out he'd only been here a month, and was still pretty new. He'd immediately started turning into a stuffed animal on his first day in, and luckily the pills took care of all that. His clothes were ruined though, haha, and all the electronics he'd brought were toast. Double haha. Passing a T intersection, I locked eyes with Regina, who was grinning at me. I had just enough time to see her clutch her pleated skirt and start to raise it before the runner led me out of sight. When I stopped and leaned back, poking my head back to see down the hall again, she giggled and pulled her skirt all the way up. Once again, she was going commando. The thatch of hair I saw had changed to the same glowing pinkish red as up top. Then the runner was calling for me. I gave a lightning-fast wave and hurried to catch up, trying to ignore the protesting from my already aching legs. Holy shift, I muttered, and grinned at my own unconscious following of her rule. Dinner was perhaps the most sumptuous meal I'd ever had in my life. I mean, my family was never very well off, but this was essentially government spending here. Somehow they'd enticed a Michelin chef out into a magic world, and given him an octopus-like Nakamaman with fire on all of its arms. The creature was bigger than I was, flicking woks full of fried rice while stirring several different pasta dishes at the same time. Other cooks and their own companion creatures helped prep, cook, and plate the food. And the smell, zug. I almost wished Regina hadn't distracted me away from the astonishing world around me, because it smelled like heaven. Sweet, savory, spicy and floral smells all mixed around. The dining hall was just a buffet, and since I hadn't eaten basically all day with Regina, I loaded up my plate with one of everything. I had crab legs and slices of pizza, California rolls and a scoop of cream pasta. The runner watched me with bemusement, telling me to slow down a bit. Then, when he asked what class I'd chosen and I told him, he got real sober.
Oh.
Then I guess you're not going to be sticking around, are ya?
What do you mean? I asked.
Well, there aren't enough healers. You're going to be stationed somewhere, probably working under a journeyman healer. Could be out in the boonies for all I know.
Oh.
You'll be out among the natives. I didn't know what that meant, and he didn't want to expand on it. Instead he waved at friends, and took his inky ferret friend with him before I could even make a proper introduction. So I ate, and then I ate more. It could have been from all the hiking, but I was pretty sure I had extra helpings because of an afternoon spent having athletic sex. And if they weren't going to stop me from eating my fill, I wouldn't stop until I was done. The evening found me back in my dorm room, a place that felt positively enormous compared to my bedroom back home. It was more of an apartment than anything else, 2 cozy little bedrooms with bunk beds, even though I was the only newbie, twin dressers and 2 vanities with large mirrors. All appeared to be trees grown directly out of the floor, without visible joints, nails or screws to keep them together. The mattress was thick and soft, definitely imported from Earth, but the rest had been, I don't know, commanded to grow like this. Even so, the dresser drawers slid smoothly out and then back in on wooden rails. There wasn't much of a chance I was going to spend more than a few nights here, but I luxuriated in the plush carpet, wine-colored, and the homey candelabras that held no candles. Instead, the tapered metal ends just lit up with a yellow-white light. The bathroom was the only place where I felt they could have done better. It was small and a bit cramped, with those same candelabras above the large mirror, which was too bright. Still, they had hot and cold water that went somewhere after I took a shower, in an anti-gravity portion of a floating castle in a magical world. What was I even doing, critiquing this? After a mental forehead slap and a chuckle, I toweled off and explored my living quarters more fully. The living area was divided into 2 sections. One included a wraparound sofa facing 2 easy chairs, while the other included desks and comfy desk chairs, and straight-backed cushion chairs that looked like smoking chairs. These had bookstands in front of them. Just as I was getting to the part where I wondered why the bookstand needed to be made of stone, or have a foot-thick base beneath, the same runner appeared with his buddies. They were each holding stacks of heavy clay tablets. Which was how I spent the evening reading through an impressive stack of information on this world, all stamped into clay and baked. These had been stamped and looked like old newspapers. Some of them even had hand-carved illustrations, essentially stamps pressed into them. These showed Nakamaman and the different sorts of gods. The guidebook was a very simplistic guide to the world here, and what I could expect to see on any given day. The Nakamaman had evolved or transformed, due to the magic here, and some of those transformations were on account of things humans had brought with them. The creatures could be shaped like anything they'd ever seen. Tweedle D was a Vulpatunia, a flower fox essentially. The guidebook explained that these creatures were shown to the world through books, generally, and then the latent magic sort of popped them into existence. So the pterodactyl-looking creature was literally just an artist's rendering of a dinosaur that had sprung to life after someone brought a dinosaur book in here and started, showing the pages to the plant life of this world? I wondered what this place had looked like initially. A barren landscape of absolutely nothing? No color anywhere? Had it only started imitating colors once humans came through? The answers to those questions weren't in the guidebook, but I read on regardless, eager to soak up the weird lore of this place. Eventually it came to the place where class selection happened, and what happened next. I read through the command again, reveal character sheet, so I said the words aloud. Before, it had been pretty simple, but now. Christopher Fletcher. Healer, Trainee 1. Attributes. Affinity 2, 2/2. Durability 3, 3/3. Ingenuity 5, 5/5. Likability 4, 4/4. Physicality 2, 0/2. Free tokens, 6 of 6. Unspent attributes points, 1. Healer skills. Diagnosis, physical, spiritual, magical, mental. Treatment, potions, salves, tinctures, elixirs, unguents. Develop cure, swarm, small, large, huge. Develop cure, elemental/nature, fire, earth, water, plant, electric. Develop cure, spiritual, beast, insect, fairy, dragon, psychic, unique. Administer cure *. Unspent skill points, 42. The tablets explained that each of those skills in the parentheses was a unique skill. So diagnosis physical was different than diagnosis spiritual, and both needed points put in them. Meaning I now had around 28 different skills, and not even enough points to give each of them a skill rating of 2. Also, I still didn't have a skill that would allow me to shrug off Blake's douchey intimidation yell, which I didn't appreciate, and no skill to defend myself from the guy.
I didn't love that either.
With luck, this assignment abroad would take me far, far from Blake and any other guardsmen who had battle skills they were forbidden from using. Then again, my luck had a pretty bad track record right this moment. I'd do a lot of finger crossing until I got to where I was supposed to be. The clay tablets and Ali suggested I should start small. The develop cure skills by size indicated the type of gods and Nakamaman I would be healing, so I put 3 ranks in both swarm and small. It then indicated I could increase the skill levels of the develop cure when I was on assignment, so I should save at least 6 skill points for those. I set those aside, leaving me with 30 points. Diagnosis seemed absolutely vital, for me to know what it was I would be doing, so I spent 3 points on all 4 of those. Unlike with the develop cure, swarm and small skills, the moment I sank the 12 points into diagnosis, I was flooded with a whole host of knowledge on how to check for various maladies. I knew how to take a blood pressure reading for the physical ailment, I knew how to apply my affinity with a magical skill to discern how magic might be at play. I knew about fonts of magic that bubbled up from beneath the earth. I suddenly knew about ley lines and the shifting tide of magic, in how it circulated throughout the world. Honestly, it was headache-inducing to have all of that flood my mind all at once. I shook my head and smiled, amazed that I could just put a point onto a screen and instantly flood my brain with understanding. With 18 remaining, it was time to take a look at what Administer Cure looked like. I now had a whole lot of screens stacked atop one another, and I was enjoying the serene atmosphere of my dorm room and the game-like challenge of distributing my points in any sort of effective way. The screen informed me that Administer Cure would take a different form with each of the affected beings. I might have to dose a creature with a big pill, and get them to swallow it, or inject them in the correct spot, or get them to inhale the cure. Hello with it, I muttered, and put 3 points into that. On a whim, I tried to put another point into it, and it allowed me. I pushed it up to rank 6, then even 7 before it stopped me and said 7 was the max for any one skill to begin. It seemed obvious that no matter how long it took me to figure out what was wrong, what treatment to use in the meantime, and how to cure the thing, it was all for naught if I couldn't actually deliver the cure in the end. If I made up a prototype of a huge friggin' pill, it would be useless if I dumped it when trying to get the creature to swallow it. Plus, the clay tablet newspaper things informed me that Administer Cure was the #1 thing you wanted in the end. This left me with the 6 I was intending to save for all the different types of creatures, and 11 more besides. I decided to put 2 in each of the different types of treatments. All the bombs, elixirs, potions, unguents, and tinctures were getting 2 ranks each. More knowledge flooded my brain, tools to use in making them, the correct viscosity of each, the fact that some were solutions and required more of this or that. I knew a whole host of potential ingredients, beginning with oils and moving on through herbs and barks of trees. Some of these I'd never heard of. The whole thing was disorienting, and I knew some aspirin would help. Acetyl-salicylic acid. Made from willow bark and other natural ingredients.
Ha, I marveled aloud.
I knew these things automatically now. Wild. I had a single skill point remaining out of the ones I was ready to spend, but pushed it over into the keep for later pile. If the max I could do was rank 7, then I should have at least that many. This made sense in my mind at the time. The runner was outside my door. He produced a pair of aspirin when I placed a hand at my head, before I could even speak.
Common occurrence?
I asked tiredly. He grinned in the affirmative.
Every time.
I have to say though, it's odd having just one newbie at a time.
Oh yeah.
The first couple of cohorts around my time were 15 to 20 strong.
My cohort was 16.
We had a lot of fun those first couple of training days. I got all kinds of laid. Practically all the girls we entered with, and one of the runners who helped us out in those training days. I had to wonder how much of this was true, and how much was bullshit. A lot of people like to puff themselves up to look good for other people, but I'd never had it happen to me. He smiled sadly at me. Pity you don't have a bunch of fellow trainees to spend the next couple of days getting to know, like biblically. Was everybody here super horny? It sure seemed like it. Blake wanted Regina, this guy wanted to nail everything that moved. And Regina wanted me, for some unfathomable reason. Back in my dorm room, I chanced to look in the enormous mirror behind the sink, and froze. My body had been transformed. I'd been a twiggy, pale little guy before, and already my sloped shoulders had a hint of definition. My sunken chest now bulged with far more muscle than ever before. The little belly I had from too many sweets and sodas was conspicuously absent, and I had biceps. Like real honest-to-meadow goddess arm muscles. They weren't big. They weren't even remotely what you would call impressive. Nobody would be asking me how often I went to the gym. I definitely wasn't a match for the towering slab of beef Blake. At the same time, I also wasn't a weakling. I leaned back and watched as a hint of muscles appeared.
Whoa, I said.
It made me want to spend my free attribute point on physicality. After a shower, it was time to hit the clay tablets again. According to the guidebook, I had selected my skills pretty well, and the instantaneous knowledge from those skill points meant I could pretty much start doing my job, like now. It was time to figure out how to get myself an assigned Nakamamon. I needed a cutesy creature in my life, starting yesterday. I was interrupted by a scratching at the window. Looking over, I saw two vine-like tendrils curling in through the window, growing with incredible speed and grasping at the stones making up my room. Buds appeared in contrasting colors, then sprang to life on the vines. Soon enough, I could hear panting, so I headed over and found Regina climbing up a hastily constructed ladder. She waved me away, and then laughing and breathing heavily, she pulled herself up through the window and into my room. She spied that my bed was just beneath the large window, and rolled down onto it.
Thanks, D.
I called out, as the vines disengaged from their grappling hook configuration. Both vines waved cheerily at me. This is Christopher, the sex object? Regina looked, if possible, even more gorgeous than she had earlier that day. Her freckles were still glowing like gemstones embedded in her skin, and her hair was still glowing a brownish red. It now included some odd highlights, like a strand or three of glittery purple, some shining green, and a lock of actual ruby. The pink sleeveless shirt had been replaced by a sky blue tank top. The happy flower between her breasts had been discolored by the magic here, with the colors running together, and that made it even cooler. She'd swapped the pleated skirt with an even shorter one in a plaid pattern. The magic was turning into a light show. And if she somehow understood everything that had ever turned me on before, she had on rainbow-colored knee-high socks. I don't know what it is about the presence of a woman's knees and half her thighs, but men everywhere will understand. If those are visible, if a sliver of midsection is visible, if a hint of cleavage is visible, it's almost better than seeing her in a string bikini. Perhaps it's what you can see playing in your mind against what you know is there, but can't see. I won't make the argument that men are complicated. We'll still drool over pictures of naked women. I will argue that there is a spectrum of allure, and sometimes less is more. Well, she said, if it isn't Christopher Fletcher.
Well,
I mimicked, grinning at her. If it is Regina, whose last name I don't remember.
Wait. I heard it once, don't tell me. It was Regina. Hamster.
She laughed and shoved me back. It's Hampstead, you goof. I'm pretty sure it's hamster, and it always has been and will be. Oh, is that how we're playing it then? I nodded sadly. I'm afraid Fletcher is an awesome last name and you won't be able to butcher it and tease me. Apologies, hamster.
Flexer? No, that's lame.
Flint, no flack, no ugh, this is hard. What brings you here? I asked, my tone pure innocence.
She stepped up, really close.
I could smell the jasmine-based perfume she'd put on. And I could feel the arousal in the air between us, somehow.
Regina was wet.
I'm wet, she confirmed, making my cock jump in my pants, and I need you to do that again from earlier.
With your tongue. Do-wah-oh.
Well, according to porn, there were several options. So you mean sit on my face, lay back and enjoy, or 69? She reacted like she just won the lottery, her face lit up with bewilderment, amazement, and pure joy. Sit on your face? Is that your final answer? I asked, with an impish grin. This world had really gotten to me, honestly. I was so overjoyed to be here, and I couldn't wait to find some monsters and gods to heal up. Right now my boner was straining against my pants and there was a girl here. Not just any girl, but a smoking hot one, who wanted me. Everything was coming up Christopher. She laughed nervously. Why don't we keep it simple first? I've never. I pulled her by one hand over to the bed, where I immediately sat down and scooted back until I had my back against the wall. She had to awkwardly climb up onto the bed, and when I pulled her even closer, she came right up to my face. The moment was charged. She hadn't understood that I wanted her to stand up on the bed, and instead I found myself staring into her purple eyes.
Glowing purple eyes.
They were like twin amethysts in there, no doubt enhanced by the magic. Fletcher? She asked very seriously, her nose about an inch from mine. I gave her my dopiest grin. You're supposed to stand up and straddle my head, I told her softly, but I'm happy to make out first. We hadn't kissed. It was all about the sex earlier today. Somehow, it felt like if we kissed, it would take the relationship to the next level, and it felt like she didn't want that. She just wanted to remain fuck buddies and not feel any attachment. Anyway, I couldn't have been more wrong. Her eyes slid to half-mast and she leaned forward to kiss me. I had only been fortunate enough to have 2 girlfriends, and we'd done a lot of making out. I could say with pride that I was a good kisser, and Regina wasn't too shabby either. Her lips were soft and moist, and she immediately got into it, licking against my upper lip and nibbling at the bottom one. Her face felt so perfect at my fingertips. I ran them up and down her jaw, over her ear, into the roots of her hair. She responded by moaning into my mouth. I couldn't help but moan a moment later when I felt her fingers grazing up and then down the length of my cock. When we broke the kiss, we were both panting. I smiled again, loving the smile I received in return. You were supposed to stand up and straddle my face, I said. That wasn't in your available 3 options, Fletcher, she said.
But she did it anyway.
One quick zip and her skirt puddled around her feet, leaving her wearing nothing but rainbow socks and a powder blue tank top. When she straightened, the junction of her thighs was at the perfect level. I extended my tongue out and got the first taste of her. It was even better than I thought it would be. With affinity as a statistic, I could taste the magic that had gotten into her body. I was also tasting with a sense that I hadn't had before. Licking her was wild and earthy and fresh. Regina let out a loud and astonished grunt, then started humping against my face. It was all I could do to hit the spot I thought I should be hitting, but her lust-filled moans told me I was doing just fine. My hands slid up her smooth calves, up her thighs, and around to her ass. "Oh, funky chicken," she moaned, and whipped her shirt off. In the meantime, I pressed my tongue up into her as far as I could, and her groan of pleasure turned to one of surprise. She made a yelp, before pressing forward even harder. "Yes, Fletcher, yes." She went on until almost the moment my jaw started to ache. It was maybe 2 minutes or 10 minutes.
I couldn't tell.
I knew every bit of her anatomy now, all the ins and outs. I could now pinpoint her clit. "You said, you never did this before," she panted. I just gave her that impish grin again. "Lay down," I breathed, and she complied, while I licked my fingers and started again. This time it was easier, with my fingers involved. Her pussy tightened around them, and the sharp intake of breath only lasted a moment before she shuddered and thrust herself up against my probing tongue. She lasted less than a minute before exploding in orgasm. She thrashed on the bed, lifting her ass up and jamming it into my face. The flavor of her intensified. The thatch of hair above where I was doing my best glittered in the dim light. She lay there for a few moments, and I stared at her nude form. She was perfect. She'd been perfect before the magic saturated into her. "I want you inside me right now," she said quietly. While I jumped up to fling my clothes off, she sat up and watched. Then, when my cock came into view, she gave it a smile and a quick peck, before spinning and getting up on hands and knees. "I want to try it like this," she said. "So do I told her, and fell to my knees. Although this was going to hurt my legs, I didn't care. I'd suffer a bit for the pleasure of it. I grabbed hold of my cock and slid it down the length of her, then back up. "Go slow," she managed, and grunted when the head slid into her. I'm still a little, sore from earlier. Nothing about this feeling seemed off. She felt incredible, hot and wet and squeezing down on me from every side. And from this angle I got to see her whole back tense and flex, and her butt jiggle when I gave her a light spank. She chuckled softly. "What was that for?" I spanked her again, and watched her ass ripple. "You thought you could just come up here unannounced and everything would work out for you, huh?" She was having trouble speaking. "I thought you wouldn't mind a little study break." She wasn't wrong about that. Still, I wanted to witness to her big round-ass cheeks wiggling from the spanks. And for that I needed a reason. She pushed back against me, taking more and more of my cock with exaggerated slowness. I liked the difference between our skin tones coming together. I liked the sound of her heavy breathing mixed with grunts of exertion. I especially liked the way the freckles across her back glittered. And the fact that she wanted more of my cock. "Oh," she moaned, and I punctuated it with another spank. "Hey. You have to ask first," I said through gritted teeth. She wasn't the only one straining here. "Take a guy out to dinner." Okay. She pushed back again, and I was finally buried in her to the hilt. I stayed just like that, savoring the sensations of her squeezing down on me and the feel of my tummy pressed against that glorious butt of hers. I smacked her but again and loved the way it moved.
"Ugh," she grunted, and went still. Fletcher.
Can you pull my hair? I nearly came right there. Instead, I agreed, leaned forward, wrapped her thick auburn hair up in one hand, and slowly pulled back until she told me to stop. This arched her back and changed the angle inside her. Suddenly, a pressure against the underside of my shaft released a bit, and I could thrust in and out without constantly worrying about exploding inside.
Which I did.
She was starting to speak again when I started really humping down into her, and she cut off. You're amazing, I told her. You have such a great body. She couldn't manage more than sharp moans each time my midsection crashed into her ass. Now I got to watch it ripple on every thrust. It was just like in porn, but 1,000 times better. Her moans rose in pitch until her elbows buckled and she went down onto her face. She shuddered and came. I couldn't hold onto her hair any longer, nor could I keep sexing her the same. That pressure to the underside had returned, and with it my imminent orgasm. She went through the throes of orgasm for several long, delicious moments. I got a rush of pride I had only ever felt a few hours ago.
Easy, she groaned. Slow.
I wasn't doing anything. She continued to spasm and clamp down on me, and moan and groan in ecstasy. I continued to stare in amazement at the gorgeous woman before me. Eventually, I pressed down on her back and led her down onto her stomach, a position I'd seen a few times but had never tried. We were already past the limit of my previous sexual experience, and I was loving it. Oh my gosh, she muttered, as my weight came down on her ass. Oh my gosh, oh my gosh. Something about this position did it for me, 100%. It was one part squishing down into her butt cheeks, so springy. It was another part kissing her freckled, glittering shoulder, her neck, her ear. And then she turned her head and we were kissing again. While I was inside her. As soon as I started moving, it ramped up to 100. I knew I wasn't going to last long like this. She was too amazing.
I can't, I told her. I'm gonna.
Not inside me, she breathed, but she wasn't moving to get away. Instead, her ass shoved back up to take more of me in, to get the full length of me. Why would she do that if?
I'm gonna, I repeated.
Where do you?
My face. On my face.
The moment arrived whether I wanted it to or not. I jerked up and out of her, and she whirled to receive the first jet all the way up her stomach and breasts. She scooted down in time to get the second jet on her breasts and neck, and got far enough down by then to get the rest on her face. I came, and then came some more. It was honestly astonishing.
Cross off another first.
First doggy style, first time eating out a woman while she was standing up, first time spanking her, first and now first time dousing her. I knelt like that on the bed for some time, just staring in wonder at what I'd done. Obviously, I was overwhelmed with sensations and emotions. I wanted her to be in my life. If it could be like this, I wanted it to be like this every day. Never mind that I hardly knew her, she was perfect like this, and the rest didn't matter to my lust-addled mind. Never mind that she had her own job to do, and that job probably wouldn't allow us to remain together. I fell to my side on the expansive bed, while she sat up and looked at herself. My legs weren't happy with what I'd just forced them to do, and I had to rub them. Regina seemed to be entranced by the amount I'd spattered on her, and started running her fingers through it, holding it up to her face to inspect it. Then she got up and padded to the bathroom, staring at herself in the mirror for some time. I heard the water going, and started wondering how they had functional plumbing, or hot and cold water for that matter, in an enchanted castle that wiped books out of existence. When she returned to bed, she was clean, but still nude save for her socks. I watched the way her body moved, the slope of her breasts, the way her smooth thighs flexed, and the way her facial expression changed when she finally stopped looking inward and saw me focused on her. "Did you get an achievement for earlier?" she asked. I nodded, grinning. She chuckled, her face a mixture of amusement and embarrassment. "I can't believe the system gives out that kind of thing." Me neither. I wondered what other kinds of achievements there were to be gotten. I could access my character sheet by saying those words, and by mentally searching for the things I wanted to see, but unclaimed achievements weren't listed, only the ones I'd done so far. Regina crossed the room and sat on the bed. "I noticed the scars," she said. "Do you want to tell me about it?" I shrugged. "I broke both my legs as a kid and didn't get surgery in time. You get growth plate problems from that kind of thing." "Shit," she said. "Sorry." I was already more physically capable than any time in my life, and it was because of the system. It was time. I brought up my character sheet and sank my free attribute point into physicality. "So, with me it hurts?" I nodded. "I can put up with the pain. I've been doing it most of my life." She lay down and draped herself over me. One leg over mine, and her head nestled into the crook of my shoulder. She fit me. It only reinforced the certainty that we should be together, despite the obvious obstacles. Holy shiznits, like all the time pain?
I shrugged it off. Most days, some pain.
When I walk around a lot, or apparently when I engage in sexual intercourse. She traced a finger up my torso. Somehow I could feel her smiling, even though I could only see her auburn hair. Thanks for pulling out.
I was
not in my right mind. I would have let you. Do you want to stay the night? I could have sex again in another couple of hours. She got up on one elbow and smiled down at me, eyes already hooded with lust.
We wouldn't get any sleep. I know I wouldn't.
I'd probably wake up sucking your cock.
I will not stop you, I told her.
If that's a thing you need to do in your sleep, I fully endorse the idea.
She chuckled.
As much as I want to, I've got another guide gig to move on tomorrow morning. Got to find the portal and get the new hire back here.
I nodded.
There's caffeine for that, right? Her lazy smile turned into a wolfish grin. You're bad, you know that? This is Christopher being capital B bad. Morning dawned with us engaged in our fourth tryst of the night. I couldn't help myself, and I make no apologies. She was gorgeous, willing, and we had complete privacy. We had slept maybe 3 hours between the second and third sex sessions. It was enough sleep to wake refreshed, go take a shower with Regina, and then get both of us horny in the midst of soaping up her back. We were eventually interrupted in the midst of standing on the sofa, pressing her against the wall of my dorm common room, by Tweedle D climbing up into the dorm room from below. I reluctantly stopped slamming my hips up into her when her Nakamaman poked its head in through the window and whined.
Oh funky chicken, she moaned.
Her hands were on the wall, and her forehead was on her hands, and she was just absorbing all I could dish out.
We have to stop. I knew it.
I just didn't want to. Reluctantly, I pulled free of her, and felt a weird bout of shame for her pet creature seeing the two of us fully naked, and me with a raging hard on no less. Regina had slid down the wall and curled up into the couch, already drowsing. Okay, she mumbled, when Tweedle D came up and nosed her in the back.
Okay. Ugh.
She made her way to the shower, didn't stop me when I also entered. This was how, 2 minutes later, her lips were wrapped around my cock.
Last time, I muttered. Last time.
I came in her mouth with a grunt and watched in amazement as she swallowed it all.
She grinned up at me. You taste good, she said.
Goodness, a gorgeous woman, down on her knees, smattering of face and chest and shoulder freckles all glinting off the light coming from the bathroom light fixtures, her nipples hard and her hair slicked back. I would make a mental snapshot of this and keep it for later. It was almost like sneaking her out of my room some 20 minutes later, with me poking my head out and checking to see if the hallway was clear. I couldn't help but laugh about the absurdity of the whole thing. We were consenting adults. Then again, first off, I didn't feel much like an adult. I felt like a kid in a candy store. That night had been better than any Christmas, any Halloween haul. I didn't care that I had to brace myself against the wall of the corridor on the way to breakfast, and stopped several times to reapply icy hot to my thighs just above my knees. That didn't matter. I hadn't just had sex, I'd practically fallen in love. The thought shocked me out of my reverie. I couldn't get too attached. Regina was still most likely nothing more than a hookup, as much as I might want otherwise. I had no idea how wrong I was. At the time, I lamented the loss of her, and wondered if I could maybe change my job over to ranger.
It was a preposterous idea.
She didn't have broken legs, and needed to be very mobile for her job. There was no way I would slow her down. Geez, oh Pete's Fletch, are you okay? Regina sounded concerned, and a bit guilty. Like she had caused me to screw her in every position I'd ever seen or read about all night.
PFF.
I could have begged off, and hadn't. I nodded and brought one knee up to my chest, then the other. I repeated it several times, amplifying the pain with a hiss before letting it get back to regular levels.
Let's get you to breakfast, she said.
We were just 10 minutes away from the end of the breakfast buffet service, and I was very glad of that fact. The exhaustion I'd cheerfully boasted wouldn't be a problem had just crashed into me. I probably looked like hell. I was practically teary-eyed to see coffee. The attendant grinned at my brimming cup of black gold. We bring fresh beans through the portal every other day, he said. Roast them on site. You people are doing the God's work, I told him blearily. Have a good day there, newbie, the attendant said. You too, my lord and savior coffee person, I mumbled back, and he laughed raucously. Regina sat across from me, and periodically fed Tweedle D bits of everything. Sausage, salad, carrot sticks, the yogurt cup. She was starting to look like I felt. Shiznicles, I told her, I'm sorry. I'm not, she said, but now we have to face consequences. It'll be a rough day, and I'll be packing extra coffee for the road.
Good idea.
The runner from yesterday meandered through the crowded cafeteria to meet us.
Hey there, Fletcher, he said, and turned to Regina. You're Regina?
And Tweedle D. His smoky, inky ferret creature was perched on one shoulder, standing tall and gazing down at us with fathomless black eyes. Tweedle D gave a yip of acknowledgement and came over to butt his head against the runner's leg. Would you believe I never got your name? I asked sheepishly.
Timmy,
he barked, in an impression of a cartoon character. And this little bundle of creepy, adorable darkness is Wendell.
It's a pleasure to meet you both, I told him.
Is it okay to pet Wendell? Regina was already reaching to do just that, and little arcs of lightning zapped her fingers.
She jerked back.
Sorry, he's a storm ferret. You'd have to be immune to electric or have a high resistance to handle touching him.
Got it, Regina said.
Timmy beamed at us, while tiny arcs of lightning zapped him here and there. Good news is that bonding with him makes me basically immune. I didn't have the heart to tell him that the hair on one side of his head was standing directly up, like it was full of static electricity. Immune was a bit of a stretch. You're slated to start training at the academy today, he said. I'm supposed to ask what job you've taken on so we can get a master in to begin your training.
Right. Healer.
At his disbelieving look, I repeated myself.
Healer. Right?
Cleric. Good for you, Fletcher, Regina said, and put a hand on mine. Just that simple touch and my body got ready for another bout of sex.
Somehow. Healer. All right. Okay.
Okay, Timmy stammered, then turned to go. I guess that's a field assignment. I'll head out and see what Mr. Rayner says. With that, he bolted out of the room. Although I felt wrung out and exhausted, I was happy.
Regina again touched my hand.
Are you sure that's such a good idea?
I asked.
That guy Blake is somewhere nearby, isn't he?
And he's got friends.
Her hand jerked away, and she frowned.
I guess you're right. What's up with Timmy?
Am I not supposed to be a healer?
Heat crept into her cheeks.
Listen, Fletcher, I'm not really supposed to talk.
Oh, fudgesicle, I muttered.
Out with it, okay?
Her face twitched.
There's a lot of accidents with healers, okay? It's practically the most dangerous profession. I would have thought Ranger would be more dangerous, I said, what with the running around all over an ever-shifting world. You would think that, but you'd be wrong. Listen, you'll probably be fine, okay? Just pay attention to Mr. Rayner and follow directions. Now you're scaring me, I told her. What is it? It's not for me to say. I didn't want to be frustrated with her, but that wasn't something I had any control over.
Okay.
I picked up my tray and started to head out. Regina looked ready to speak, and boy did I hope she did. I hoped she wanted to apologize for not telling me, and come give me a big hug to make up for it. Then explain what she wasn't telling me. None of those things happened. Mustache Head was Mr. Rayner. He looked a bit like Albert Einstein, but with less hair up top. Every patch of hair on his face was like its own bristle brush, and that went double for the biggest patch, running around his head from ear to ear. Well now, if it isn't our resident God-touched, he boomed and laughed. I couldn't help but smile. Yeah, sorry about bringing you out of the castle and away from your duties here.
Nonsense, he yelled.
This man did not have an inside voice, and it made me smile. I'd been summoned not to the academy, where training happened for everybody else, but the infirmary. This involved reversing gravity again a weird sensation. The infirmary was a massive and spacious hall sectioned off by mobile white partitions. Plain old gurneys sat in neat rows, though the white sheets had been stained by magic in some form or another. One had a starfish of purple and pink seeping into it. Another was littered with yellow splotches that appeared to be stars. In 4 different places around the huge room, nurses' stations were set up, but 3 of the 4 were empty. There was a sort of inner circle of gurneys beyond that, and Mr. Rayner's office in the center of everything. Walk with me, Fletcher, he said, and without preamble took me by the shoulder and led me outside. The huge medical hall had equally enormous double doors leading out onto a walkway that ran the circumference of the castle. It afforded us a right-side-up view of the surrounding countryside. The trees, which sometimes spasmed and adopted different poses, the mountains rearranging themselves, and the colossal mushrooms were all easily visible. Some flying creatures made their way through the skies. I couldn't tell if they were plain old Nakamoman monsters or perhaps gods. What kind of person are you, Mr. Fletcher?
I don't know what you mean, I told him truthfully.
If you're asking my ancestry, I'm from all over the place. If you're asking what kind of personality I think I have, in a word I'd say stubborn.
He chuckled.
Tenacity is a trait my friend and yours Dick Johnson would have been looking for, sure. He gestured out toward the wider world. You could have chosen anything, my boy. You could have decided that you wanted to be stationed here at the castle, and thought that guard would be your best buy for a magic companion animal, and powers that render you a superhuman, and that would have been that.
But I didn't. No. You did not.
We walked on, with me watching some of the folks flying upside down toward lower parts of the castle, or the ones flipping midway around. The weirdest were people who took off from the upside down and soared out away from the castle a good way, continuing the gravity they'd started with, only to flip at some demarcation line I couldn't see. The huge manta ray I'd seen yesterday flew into view, and edged very close to where Rainer and I were walking. I noted that Rainer chose to walk on the outside, closer to a fall of over 100 feet, but closer to where he could come into contact with his Nakamon. The stocky, chubby man reached out with one hand and the creature drifted over to nuzzle his hand. You could have gone with research, administration, or something even more banal. A runner like our friend Timmy, at the absolute lowest rungs of administration. I chose to be a healer. He knew this, and I knew this, and I couldn't be sure what he was driving at, stating the obvious. Instead of knowledge, control, or ease, you went with the path of service to the world here. Mr. Rainer, if there's a point you'd like to make, I hope you could make it quickly. Mustache Head regarded me carefully. You also reached out to try helping an ailing god before you knew what you were doing. And I have to tell you, Mr. Fletcher, if I hadn't spent the last several weeks tending to the goddess of the meadows, diagnosing her, treating her, working up a cure, if I hadn't slapped together that cure in a handful of minutes instead of over the course of hours and hours, well, he shook his head. If she had resisted the cure, tried to shake me off, tried to attack or run, you'd be dead right now, son. I chewed at my lip thoughtfully. I'm from a different generation, kiddo. My pops served in World War II and I served in Vietnam. I never had a smartphone and I never grew up with video games, 24-hour television, or the internet everywhere I went. We call it going in half-cocked. But essentially it's being impulsive. If you're impulsive, if you go in half-cocked, you're going to be one in a long list of dead healers. Mr. Rainer didn't stop walking when I froze. He and his flying manta ray kept right on having a moment with one another. Finally, I trotted up by his side again. We turned the corner again and continued onward. I know it's dangerous now, I told him. I'm not going to make that mistake again.
He snorted.
Sure, you won't make that mistake again, but what about the other mistakes you're going to make? You're in an ever-shifting, ever-changing world. Things aren't the way they were the night before, when you wake up in the morning. You haven't met the natives. I assume, I told him, your job is to help prepare me for these sorts of issues, so I don't end up dead.
He nodded. Yep.
And there will be other organization members there to help keep me safe and mitigate the damage.
There will be, he said.
Meaning when I make the mistakes I'm sure to make, it'll be as someone who's fully ready to accept the consequences, and you won't have to blame yourself for my death. He regarded me for some time, while the third corner of the castle drew closer. Groups of people flew this way and that. I'm pretty sure I saw Russ on his glimmerdactyl. I liked the big, cheerful guy. A lot more than I liked the dour Rainer. More like Rainer on my parade. Some of what you need to know you already know, he said. Assuming you purchase skills with your available starting points.
I nodded.
I know a lot more than yesterday, except I don't know how to pronounce the word unguents. It was Rainer's turn to stop and throw back his head, and roar laughter. Oh, that's rich.
Is it unguents?
Or unguints? He regarded me. Fair play, Fletcher. You understand that my conduct as a healer going forward is on my head and not yours. He still appeared troubled, like he was ready to add my dog tag to a very heavy chain.
Let's get to work, I said. And we did.
This is Christopher learning the ropes. Training lasted a whole week, and blessedly, included several more visits from Regina. I chafed at the lack of my own Nakamon creature companion, but Rainer assured me that it was highly dependent on the job I was doing, and the needs associated. I'd landed myself in the most dangerous of professions, and that meant it was more important for me to have the appropriate Nakamon. Rangers and guards could have whatever they wanted, since their jobs almost never required them to use their Nakamon in the doing of their duties. Rainer took me out and quickly became impressed with my ability to find and identify local plant life, then state what they were used for generally. We went through a number of fruit and vegetables that were typically used in making oils for the drinkable cures. I was forced to get a dab of each on my fingertip and try to identify them by licking them, which was practically impossible, at first. By the third day I could tell olive oil from canola oil without difficulty, and both of those against sesame oil, no problem. Rainer's training forced me to overcome several system checks. Some of these I spent tokens to deal with, while others that seemed lower down the ladder of importance I tried to tackle with my skills and stats. These largely succeeded, though I failed a handful of times at likability checks with Nakamaman in the field, and an affinity check to synthesize a potion. The cool thing was that I got experience points for successes and failures, and the even cooler thing was getting more experience points for the failed checks. I netted only a handful of XP for easy or moderate checks, and a lot more for hard and more difficult challenges. The harder ones were usually beyond me, but they still provided more XP than succeeding at easy and moderate. I leveled to trainee 2 and 3 in the first and second days. I was elated, but Rainer seemed unimpressed. This led me to look into Ali's info tablets, where I found that there were 25 levels of trainee before getting to apprentice rank. Trainee level 2 granted me 2 skill points, while trainee level 3 granted me the first special ability, hard at work.
Hard at work.
Special ability, common, passive. When engaged in checks that pertain to your class, your tokens are worth double. The best part about leveling up was getting my tokens refreshed. I had initially hoped that I might end up with more than my attributes, if they weren't spent, but it was not to be. My physicality tokens went from 1 to only 3, instead of adding my physicality level of 3. The upside was that I had 6 free tokens, every level. Thanking the goddess of the meadow for my unbelievable power, I stared at my new and improved character sheet, basic as it was. Christopher Fletcher. Healer Trainee 3. Attributes.
Affinity 2, 2/2.
Durability 3, 3/3. Ingenuity 5, 5/5.
Likability 4, 4/4.
Physicality 3, 3/3.
Free tokens, 6 of 6.
Unspent attributes points, 0. Healer skills. Diagnosis, physical 3, spiritual 3, magical 3, mental 3. Treatment, potions 2, salves 2, tinctures 2, elixirs 2, unguents 2. Develop cure, swarm 3, small 3, large, huge. Develop cure, elemental/nature, fire, earth, water, plant, electric. Develop cure, spiritual, beast, insect, fairy, dragon, psychic, unique. Administer cure 7.
Unspent skill points, 9.
Special abilities.
Hard at work, common, passive. Divine gifts.
Floral knowledge, rare, passive. I thanked Ali for letting me know I'd be a trainee forever, and she chuckled. Most newbies got out of trainee status before their first few months on the job were up. Apprentice, she informed me, is not even where the system rapidly increases in difficulty. No, you will have to reach past level 250 and become a master. I was level 3. The concept of hitting level 250 was astonishing to me. Then again, the next day I hit level 4 and was given 1 ingenuity point and 1 attribute point to spend how I liked. I was tempted to go straight into physicality, sorely tempted. I knew my body could use the boost to stop my legs from being a problem. That said, I also understood that the magical sense and affinity was bound to be useful to the job I hadn't even started, and likability was apparently good for working with the natives. Although they were a pacifistic sort of people, that didn't mean we automatically got anything we wanted when we went out to play doctor in their lands. I let it sit for now. Once I started my job, I would know whether or not I could sink it into my dump stat physicality, or if I'd need magic knowledge, the ability to work for longer, more charisma, or even a better thinky brain. So far, the system seemed forgiving, which felt a whole lot like most video game systems I was used to. The ones created after the first generation NES and Super NES, that was. The days before tutorials were a thing. After 1990, video games got increasingly easier and easier. On the 4th day, there was a problem requiring Rainer's expertise. When I woke up with Regina in my arms and Tweedle D sleeping at the foot of the bed, something felt different. The moment I got out of bed and put my foot on the floor, it sounded like a thunderclap. A tiny thunderclap, but a thunderclap nonetheless. The next footstep gave off an audible squelch that made me giggle. Outside in the hall came a cacophony of bizarre sounds, along with confused exclamations here and there. I heard some muffled laughter, and some cursing through the wall, and grinned. The next step sounded like a cricket chirp. After that it was the sigh of a satisfied lover. Okawaye, I said, and made my quiet way to the shower. Every time my foot came into contact with the floor, a new and weird sound emerged. A bee's buzz, the crackle of static from televisions of decades past, a brief burst of police sirens, a roar of laughter from a sitcom laugh track. I was spared most of that in the shower, but by the time I got out, Timmy was at my door. I hope you don't mind, you didn't answer. His eyes flew wide open when Regina appeared with the squawk of a bird that wasn't a chicken. She locked eyes with him, and both froze. Then she disappeared back into my bedroom, trailed by a series of snorts, grunts, crinkles and other odd sounds.
What's going on? Dude, he hissed.
I heard you pissed off Blake and he ended up getting demoted down to local village security out in the boonies. You can't just be stealing his girl like that. She's not his girl, I said, unimpressed with where this was going. Now, you came here for a reason that definitely had nothing to do with Blake's non-existent significant other.
What's going on?
Rainer sent for you. We made the absolute weirdest noises heading across the castle to find him. Rainer was frowning, which I loved. It made his mustache completely consume his mouth. Without his mouth, he just looked like a video game doctor, like from the Megabot series of video games. Sure, he wasn't wearing a lab tech's white coat. Sure, he was standing on a gigantic floating manta ray-style creature. Sure, instead of a clipboard or a tablet, he had a backpack suitcase with all sorts of ingredients inside. Fletcher, there you are. We have a situation with a god?
I asked. Just so.
You're going to get your first chance to approach one without foolishly touching one before you have any idea of its condition, and let me remind you that touching it is strictly forbidden.
Got it, I said. Climb aboard, son.
I clambered up onto the Nakamoman's back, while Timmy and Wendell looked on. Mr. Rainer. Mustache Head just held up one fat hand and the manta ray slid noiselessly out into the air. I spared one last look at Timmy and saw a concerned grimace on his face.
Ugh.
I couldn't control what people talked about. I hoped like hell Regina could sort him out, or he was cool about what he'd seen. We were all technically adults here, but people like Blake, the other guards, and possibly Timmy tripped my not yet grown up sensor. Like they were on their way toward being adults, had adult bodies and all, but weren't yet out of the ridiculous drama phase of their lives yet. Using affinity, we will be scouting out the location of the god in question. It was the god of footsteps. What's the size of something like that?
I asked. Small? Swarm. One hopes.
On the other hand, the smaller ones are harder to find. And if they are yet to be in serious distress, they may be quite mobile. I opened my mouth to say we should just follow the sound of the squeaks and grunts and ambulance sirens and record scratching noises, only to realize those were everywhere. Everywhere people walked, the sounds of their footsteps went berserk. If possible, we try to isolate the phenomenon. If this is a god of blue eyes, we round up the blue-eyed people and see if we can use them to work toward a location. This won't be so easy. Affinity, unknown, check. As part of your efforts to diagnose the situation, your ability hard at work comes into effect. This check is extreme difficulty. Would you like to spend 12 tokens to automatically succeed this check? 12 tokens to automatically succeed it, I told him. If you have that many. I pressed yes just to see what would happen. All my affinity tokens, 2 and 4 of my free tokens went into the pot, doubled because this was now my job, and a sound like a pulse resounded from deep in the well of my.
I don't know. My guts?
Wherever your third eye is at any given time. The chakras as a concept were sort of correct here, meaning that sometimes your affinity resonates from your heart, sometimes from your butt, sometimes from the top of your head. Just now, it came from my gut. The pulse flew out in all directions and echoed off the god in question. Then, whatever fueled the power narrowed into a single beam, and I pointed in the direction of the faint blue line heading toward the right side up portion of the castle. Rainer gave me a significant look but swung his flying manta ray up and around in the direction I'd indicated. Soon enough we were heading there, and I noted the beam of light intensified.
Came into focus. Sharpened. We're getting closer, I told him. He nodded.
The plethora of noises that came with the territory grew in volume as we got closer. We skimmed along the edge of the castle until it became clear that the huge shaft in the center of the castle was a better bet.
Up and inside, I told him. Then down.
The ray swooped sharply upwards, and I grabbed onto the harness handles provided. Soon enough we swooped up over the castle walls, over the courtyard in the right side up part, and the line came even more sharply into view. Very close now, but it's distracting. The sounds of so many messed up steps was impossible to ignore. Some were elephant trumpets, others howler monkeys shrieking out, shouts and calls of birds, hints of violin solos, car horns, and one that I was sure was a repeated burst of armpit farts. I don't care who you are, that's sure to get in your brain and shove everything else out. Rainer opened up his mouth and thundered out. Everybody freeze. It was like a magical ability in and of itself. The UI informed me that he had used hard at work for a critical success at a likability check, and I opted not to spend any of my tokens on what was an action designed to help us do our jobs.
It sure did work on me.
I suddenly respected the man so much I was willing to obey this very reasonable request. The other reasons flooded in. The sooner he was done, the sooner people could get back to their own jobs. He was trying to fix this thing, and also that injured gods were terribly dangerous, and best to let him get about his business. The noises mostly stopped as people froze in their tracks. We followed the blue beam of light into the dorm rooms. And after we hopped off Rainer's Nakamamon, the beam continued to lead us right to my dorm. Not awesome, I muttered, over the sound of my footsteps. They were frogs croaking, that horrible sound your fingers make when you rub them down a balloon, and the sound of a whiteboard marker screeching on the board. I chuckled, despite the fact that the god of footsteps was just outside my window. It was nearly invisible, and it was indeed small. It appeared to be nothing more than a pair of shadowy shoes.
I knew it, I breathed.
You're getting ahead of yourself, trainee, Rainer said, leaning heavily on the word trainee. Keep away from the entity.
Sure, I said.
Why was it close to my dorm? I heard several confused yips from above, right where my window was, followed by the glimpse of several flower-covered tails. What do we do next?
Rainer asked.
Call for guards, secure the area. Correct, he said, so I cupped my hands and called out for the guards. It wasn't long before several came running up, their footfalls sounding like pots and pans banging together, like a jet engine screaming high overhead, or like a crack in the thick ice in the center of a lake, among others. Heads peeked out of windows, and several guards zipped in on modes of flying transportation. When they hopped off, the ridiculous fanfare continued, a marching band playing a half-second of something upbeat, a vocalist singing out in falsetto, and the explosion of artillery fire.
It was wild.
We have a sick god here.
I called out.
Let's cordon off the area. Thankfully, they knew their jobs better than I did. Several of them hovered around overhead at a good distance, to keep an eye on things, while others quietly called out orders, set up a perimeter, keep people from coming out to this courtyard, get someone in these dorm rooms and get them cleared out, and Rainer was frowning at me. What's next? I suggested. He nodded, eyes almost vanishing under his twin mustache eyebrows. We're supposed to run a series of diagnostics, I said, not sure how that was supposed to go exactly. Sure, I'd read the manual, but run a series of diagnostic tests was pretty flipping vague. Also correct. I stopped myself from sighing in relief or beaming at getting two in a row right. He reached into a pouch and produced a small vial of dried green leaves. As soon as he pulled off the stopper, the scent of purple whimsy wafted out. Rainer got a good pinch of the whimsy and spread it out in a circle over the twin shadowy shoes. I'd been given advice on how to streamline the UI process, turning dialogue panels into just plain scrolling text at the bottom of my field of vision, or to have the words appear directly in my head. Ali had spent a long time going over the settings and specific options I had at my disposal. Healers needed every available advantage, because theirs was the only real dangerous job here in this new world. We're doing a test for magical ailments first, he said. Do you see what I'm using? Dried leaves of purple whimsy, I said, and this time those eyebrow mustaches shot up. Somebody's been hitting the books, he said. Someone had actually been hitting that ace, I thought, but definitely didn't say. He didn't have to conduct the other 3 diagnostic tests, because the purple whimsy erupted into flames that first appeared blue, but quickly ran through several other colors. It's magical, all right. Is it always? I asked ahead of my brain. Of course not, he said, his mustache brows knitting back down and making his eyes vanish again. I'd known that, of course. We'll try treat the little guy with an elixir or a potion. These are best for magical ale. The little feet suddenly moved, and Rainer jumped back.
Not fast enough.
The feet brushed against his wrist and he yelled out. They went running off, but I held my hands out.
Hey, I told it kindly. It's all right.
We're trying to help. Back away from that thing, Fletcher. I know, you're probably scared, I said to the little god. I made sure to remain calm, quiet, and non-threatening. I took 2 very slow steps toward it. We're all scared too, but we're going to fix you.
Back off. Rainer barked.
That did it. The feet jumped a foot in the air and took off. They got about 8 feet before they bounced off a magical shield held by one of the guards. In the meantime, Mustache Head threw a potion together on the fly, muttering the ingredients. A pinch of this, a scoop of that, and soon enough he had it dissolving in the liquid. I watched him work, trying to make sure I could replicate it if something happened to him. And like that, the potion flashed to life. It had stats from the UI, but Rainer thrust the potion down at the inky shoes and splashed the mixture over it. They shuddered and relaxed. This is Christopher fearing he may have made an unwise choice. I followed Rainer through the process of healing up the god of footfalls. This first meant keeping it under guard all the time. While it was sedated by the potion, people's footsteps were still all over the place, but the sensation was a lot quieter. Rainer wanted to move the god, but the guards on hand weren't comfortable putting their hands anywhere near it. Understandably, since some of them had watched me nearly die from the meadow goddess, and the ones who hadn't had definitely heard about it from the ones who had. I'd picked that up from the snickers I was hearing while walking around the castle. As the days wound on, he allowed me to mix up the potion to calm it. I memorized the plants used: stem of hellfeather thistle, dried and crushed, globe amaranth petals, and root of phoenix creeper. These were mixed into a solution of jaln oil, and magic was added to allow the god to ingest it. Once infused with magic, it needed to be administered within an hour of creation. Luckily for us, the god didn't have a mouth, so it could simply absorb the potion through its magical body. Pouring the potion onto it worked perfectly. As the week wore on, we researched the magical ailments he had on hand. It wasn't something called mana drought because the supply of ambient magic wasn't critically low. It wasn't mana sickness because the ambient magic wasn't insanely high. What about the little rainbows it left when it started to run away?
I asked. Rainer frowned. Good catch.
It's the rainbow plague then. I returned my attention to the Book of Cures, the huge stack of clay tablets done up like newspapers.
And that is? We don't know yet.
Not sure where it comes from or why it's affecting certain gods at random, and not others. It was the same as the goddess of meadows. That meant I was about to do something stupid. When you healed me, for touching the flower god, I asked.
What I only saw white.
What did you do to save my life? It simply requires you to administer the cure to the source, he said wearily, flexing his one hand over and over again. You'll develop a resistance to it over time, if you're not killed outright.
Relief flooded me.
Now I could do something stupid in relative safety. The operative word being relative. He held up his wrist and removed the bandage, revealing the telltale slash, seething with rainbow oil slick energy. Several drops fell and plopped onto the workstation, where they sizzled with rainbow magic and began to dissolve into steam. He waved me back away. Apparently it was contagious, even airborne. It's vital you bandage this and he swayed on his feet. And we still need to hurry, resistance or no resistance. He wasn't looking good by the second day, and handed over working up the cure to me. We needed ingredients from the mountains. According to the cure write-up, there were summer mist lilies up there. This meant heading out into the lands beyond the castle on his manta ray Nakamaman, who was called Raphael. I was given a new runner, Tara.
Hi, she chirped. You're the new healer, huh? I'm Tara.
I'm technically a ranger, but they mostly have me running errands all over the castle because they need someone who has a lot of energy. Turns out I have a lot of energy.
She certainly did.
Tara kept talking as she seized my hand and shook it, telling me she was amazed I wanted to be a healer here. She also told me her older sister's friend Bethany wanted to be a nurse but she wasn't any good at it, and Bethany had come here but kind of flunked out of being a healer here. Then Tara told me about her sister, her parents, the deal with her parents, they hardly spoke but had been married forever, about her brother, a drywall installer, and the time she'd gone out to Disneyland in California. Tara stood a hair taller than me, long and lean without a hint of fat. She was the type of sorority girl who worked out relentlessly and went out to yoga and Pilates all the time. Subsequently, she was in the sort of shape that allowed her to wear yoga pants right this second. I blinked at her several times as she continued on, telling me about her recruitment situation back a few months ago. She had been in the cohort after Timmy, and blah blah blah. I couldn't help but glance at her body. The yoga pants were flesh-colored, making it look like she wasn't actually wearing anything below the waist. The long red t-shirt that flared out like a skirt halfway down her but didn't help. It was sleeveless, with little ruffles at her shoulders. Then I stopped myself from staring with a mental slap, because I didn't want her to notice. Also, I had a steady stream of mind-bending sex in the form of Regina. You don't need armor or weapons or anything as a ranger?
I asked.
She laughed the question off.
Nonsense.
Only Nakamaman out there, and some defective gods here and there, but I've been informed they're quite rare. We should be okay. She did have a fully stocked hiking pack, and I hefted my pack as well. We should only be gone for a few hours, I said, and explained about mountain mist lilies, as well as henge grass. We needed that as well. I was under instructions to gather up any of the other ingredients for the treatment potion while I was out, but not to dally. If we're lucky, we'll find both of those things on top of the mountain, or in a valley, on top of the potion ingredients. A cozy, misty mountain valley. I can't wait.
Tara chirped and grinned.
Okay, Raphael, are you ready to have us aboard? Raphael was fully sapient, because his head dipped in a quick nod. I clambered aboard after Tara, first getting a completely inappropriate view of her ass in those yoga pants, and a hint of what lay between her legs. She grinned at me when I got seated and strapped in next to her. It didn't seem like she'd caught me out, and I gave an internal sigh of relief. The flight over to the mountains only took perhaps a half hour, but Tara was so excited for me to know everything about her experience here, her life before, and the way this job was changing her life for the better. You know, I can afford any food I want now, she said.
PFF.
I used to have just mac and cheese, ramen, and a lot of egg sandwiches. Now I can go to restaurants anytime I feel like it. I put down a payment on an actual house, not that I need to, but apparently rental property is the way to make money. My student loan debt is gone. What did you major in?
I asked.
Anthropology, she said, grinning. Ugh, this place is absolutely amazing for Anthro Fletcher. You haven't met the natives yet, but you will. They'll have you in one of the larger towns, and then you'll probably be making house calls out to the villages. She kept going, telling me about how great it was, and then her hand covered mine. Look. Out amongst the sun-kissed fields were a group of something like dinosaurs, duck-billed creatures with mottled red and yellow skin. They also had feathery frills running the whole length of their bodies, from forehead on back to the tips of their tails, which appeared to be made of undulating fingers. They were bounding across the fields and toward a river. Beyond, the grasses themselves were purple, red, yellow, and gold. I couldn't focus on much other than the warm feel of her hand on mine. This place, she said reverently, and removed her hand. You can smell it in the air, you can taste it, it's so good. It's so perfect. It's great, I said, meaning it. It had been 2 days without anything in the way of leg pain. The encounter with the god of footfalls had gotten me almost all the way to level 5. Aside from Blake, and the fear that the company people were going to forbid Regina and I from being together, I had only positive experiences here. Money was piling up on the other side of the portal, going to my parents and my sister. Hey, where's your Nakamaman?
I asked.
I have a confession, she said, grinning like she was about to open her first ever Christmas present. We're actually here for another reason. If I can find a companion, I'm supposed to form a bond with it. That is so great, I said, instantly wondering how that should go and whether or not that meant I had a Nakamaman in my near future. What level do you need to be before you get one? The answer was after level 12. Meaning I had just a few more weeks of leveling and work before I could get my own. So what level are you? I asked. There was no viewing other people's character sheets without extremely high wizard skills and special abilities. Discussing skill levels, attribute ranks and special abilities seemed frowned upon, except with your superiors. 18, she said, then rushed to explain that since she'd been doing all this running around the castle, she hadn't really gotten much in the way of leveling up. She'd begged to get this assignment, for leveling as much as for trying to find a companion creature. She didn't have any expectations of finding the perfect one today, but she was going to keep her eyes open. You never know what you're going to see, or if life will throw a miracle at you, you know? 2 weeks ago, I wouldn't have agreed with you, I told her. Now though, I think you're absolutely right.
Oh yeah? Why not?
I was hesitant to give her details.
I didn't want a pity party.
And I didn't generally share what was going on in my family life, for reasons of discomfort and fishing for sympathy. That said, she had just poured out her entire life story to someone she had never met before. My mom's sick, my sister's life is kind of a mess, and she and my parents don't talk a lot.
Oh.
Her voice filled with concern, but I smiled and waved it away. But the money from this job is going to help. I think me leaving is probably going to force them to talk. My parents need to see their grandchildren, especially if my mom's cancer gets really bad really fast. And my dad, he wasn't doing well. I was worried he might lose his job.
You're so kind, she said. I waved her off. Thanks.
You'd do the same.
A lot of the people here wouldn't.
That Blake guy that got in your face?
He wouldn't.
There are a lot of rangers who are talking about investing, traveling a lot, retiring at age 35. She gave me a winning smile, and I noted that her eyes were 2 different colors. One of them was gold, like glowing molten gold, and the other was a soft ocean blue. You're certainly a healer. Raphael had brought us to the top of the mountain. It was covered in vegetation, with tons of flowers, bushes, young trees, and a few older ones all clogging the absolutely breathtaking view we just had on Raphael's back. Hey, she said, and when I turned she was very close to me. She wrapped me in a tight hug, and I pointedly ignored all the curves, the softness, and the warmth of her body against mine. Some of the others, they have situations at home. I don't hear them talking about paying for their nieces and nephews. You're a good person, Fletcher. Thanks, I said, both flustered and embarrassed. I had had a simple and straightforward relationship with girls like this all through school, none at all. Oh, I could secretly lust after them, because that's what teenage boys did, they lusted. So while there was Stephanie Ambrose and Danielle Donaszewski and the rest, I'd never actually talked to them. And talking to Tara was not as hard as I'd imagined. The wondrous beauty of this other world definitely helped us bond over literally everything around us, sort of how Regina and I had done. The weather was unpredictable, and wind had begun to gust in, bringing cooler air with it and turning a pleasant summer day into a chilly fall. Tara whipped out a knit sweater and zipped it up, which only accentuated her lovely button legs in those skin-colored yoga pants. Ugh. It wasn't even fair. Whenever she got more than 20 feet away, it looked exactly like she was naked from the waist down. Her hair was up in a blonde ponytail. She was well out of my league, and not only that, but Regina and I were. Actually, what were we? I had no real concept of what she felt like our relationship was. She had slept at my place 2 out of the last 5 nights, and I had enjoyed carnal delights with her even when she didn't stay the nights. She'd ranged out to grab up other incoming newbies, but she kept returning and slobbering all over my knob, or shoving her crotch in my face, or riding me cowgirl, or begging me to pull her hair and spank her ass. Meaning we were, sex friends. I had no idea what that meant in terms of exclusivity. We hadn't formalized anything. Tara broke me out of my reverie. What do these things look like? By now, after only a half hour, I liked Tara. I felt like she was already my friend. I described the plants we were looking for, and showed her the painted panels I'd brought, copies of several pages. She nodded and stalked off. While I searched for the plants I needed, and quickly found a bunch of them, I ruminated. Tara was far, far above me. The old me. The new Christopher Fletcher could eventually have a physicality of a fracking Olympian if I wanted. I could artificially boost my likability, and whatever happened once I did that. I resolved, while picking the summer mist lilies off a shady part of the mountain ridge, to have a talk with Regina. Is this hellfeather thistle? I've already got some, I called back. We moved lower, got on Raphael and swooped into a cleft in the mountain, where rain would collect, or where a spring would carve a natural stream and then turn that stream into a shallow valley. It was shady, gorgeous, and very quiet. There, we'll look there. Raphael made a strange hooting sound and set us down nearby. I immediately started swiping, said the phoenix creeper with a walking stick. It soon had burn marks up and down the end, and when I found the root, I hacked at it with my multi-tool. Once it was dead, the roots came up easily. Is this the henge grass? She called. You said it grows out of cracks in rocks, right? Yup. She came trotting up, swatting plants aside and panting. Oh, good. She trailed off, and I locked eyes with her. Fletcher? She asked. Is there, what's happening? There was, and I also was. Something was happening, because I had a hard-on and it had come from nowhere. It was straining against my pants. I was hard enough to feel it in my balls. When I looked, my eyes were drawn magnetically to the crotch of her yoga pants. A wet spot had formed there, through her panties and through the yoga pants themselves. I was no expert in female anatomy, but in my experience so far, it wasn't possible to get so turned on you flooded through both panties and pants. Tara looked drunk, eyelids drooping, lips parted, cheeks flushed, and breathing heavily. Right in front of me, she shoved one hand down her pants and groaned. Fletcher, I'm burning up. This is beyond Christopher's wildest fantasies. This must be some kind of god situation, I said, through a mouth feeling like it was filled with cotton. A god of sex or something. We needed to leave. My feet refused to move. The only thing I could do was watch her move her hand in her pants. A ludicrous question came out of her mouth. Are you the god of sex? It wasn't funny. Her voice was thick with need and heat. I could practically see the want drifting up off her body. No, I could literally see it, in honey gold tendrils floating up off her against gravity, and fading out of existence when they got more than a foot away from her. There was magic to arousal, apparently. We needed to climb onto Raphael and get out of there, immediately. It was time to get away from this place. The only motion came from my mouth. I was salivating with the need to see her, touch her, smell her, have her. My pants were practically bursting with the need to be inside her. Take them off, my mouth said, sounding husky and full of promise. She slipped the yoga pants down her legs without a word, and straightened with them at her knees. She had a thin landing strip of blonde hair streaked with brown, but my eyes were drawn lower. Her lower lips made her fingers shine with wetness. They moved in small circular motions, pausing to slip a finger into herself, and sometimes pausing to pull her pussy lips apart so I could see better. "Fletcher, I need to see it," she breathed.
"Your cock."
My hands moved to obey her, and quickly got my pants and underwear out of the way so she could see what I was packing. Tara sucked in a gasp of breath and fell to her knees in the greenery, leaning back to show me her orgasm.
"I'm CUH," she managed. "Oh foo."
She groaned and shuddered with her eyes firmly fixed on my tool. Movement in my periphery showed a lithe figure leaning against a nearby tree. Figures, engaged in the act. They were green and melded together, so that they were just a tangle of arms and legs. Neither had facial features that I could see, but the one who was being ravished had two big yellowish eyes, wide and staring at us. The other one was facing away, but where the two connected, they were just one. Their fuzzy moss-like bodies had no seam separating them. The one facing away might be thrusting into the other, but for all intents and purposes they were one entity. Tara had fallen to her knees and in one quick motion ripped off her hoodie and shirt. Her hand immediately went back to her dripping wet sex and continued rubbing.
"Now you
get naked too," she begged. I did, and she hissed out every breath through her teeth, like just seeing me was completely undoing her understanding of reality. Belatedly she seemed to realize she still had on yoga pants, but I was already crawling toward her, on my hands and knees, and I ripped them away from her feet. Her shoes and socks went flying.
"Oh," she groaned.
When I bent to taste her, she hit my tongue like a party, bright and lovely and exciting. She arched her back and thrust herself up into me, immediately beginning to orgasm again. Whatever the god was doing to her, she was producing a lot of juices, and they got all over my face. Like they were filled with a potent aphrodisiac, I lapped them up and felt myself swelling below with need. I needed to blast into her. Needed it. On my face, she told me breathlessly. I want it in my mouth. Dutifully crawling up her body, I positioned myself at her mouth, and spared a look at the two creatures that were one. The one was busy bobbing its head into the other one's crotch. So I put my cock directly into Tara's mouth. She knew what to do, and began blowing me immediately. Whatever was driving us to do this, it heightened the sensations I was feeling to the max. Just the suction of her mouth sent me right up to the edge, and looking down at the intense look of arousal in her eyes sent me over. I came more than I ever had in my life. Much more. The power of this god really gave me reserves that otherwise just didn't exist. Tara's mouth overflowed with my seed, even while she was gulping it down. Pulling free, I aimed the rest at her face, just as she had asked. For a while, neither of us moved. She stared at the shaft in front of her like she'd never seen one before, while I just felt the bliss that had overcome me slowly receding. By now, there was no resistance. I couldn't even imagine doing anything other than servicing Tara. That was my only goal. That was what I would do. "I'm going to funk you," I told her. Her only response, dripping with my seed, was to nod dumbly and spread her legs further. Taking one ankle in hand, I positioned them at my shoulders. Those legs were so long and toned, and an overly bronze color that seemed unnatural. Plunging into her was like arriving home after a long day of work. I hadn't gone soft, and I didn't feel anything other than the ecstasy of the flesh surrounding me. Her body enveloped me in its heated, velvety embrace, and I watched her face go through the contortions. "You're big," she ground out through gritted teeth. "Really, really big." "I'll go slow," I told her. "No." Her eyes flew opened and she stared slack-jawed into my face. "Funk me, Fletcher. Hard." I did exactly that. First I slammed down into her, deep, leaning forward and beginning to fold her in half. She grunted like I'd punched her in the gut, and winced, but she didn't tell me to stop. Instead I pulled all the way back out, and slammed down again. Soon the only sound in this green river valley, burbling with water coursing down the mountain, was the slapping of flesh on flesh. She grimaced in what looked like pain as I kept on. "Keep going," she managed. I couldn't have done anything else. My cock was in control now, and it desperately wanted the tight confines of Tara's body. It wanted the deepest places. "Do me, Fletcher. Don't stop. Don't stop, do me, oh fudge, don't stop." I wasn't going to be able to last much longer, but speech was beyond me. Instead I gritted my teeth as well, and sank my fingers into the moss to try to focus on any sensation other than the bronze beauty under me. Another minute of hard pounding and her eyes flew open. Her head shot back into the soft moss and she bucked hard. Her third orgasm arrived with her legs slipping off my shoulders and around my waist. Ankles locked behind me, just above my ass, while she came and came. That did it. I started, but couldn't finish the sentence.
Inside, she hissed. She didn't know what she was saying. I didn't either. There was no resisting her. She had perfect, muscular yoga legs, she was clasping tightly onto every bit of my cock, and she was demanding to have me come inside her. I couldn't break free, and more importantly, I didn't want to. The gods had maneuvered so they could watch us, with one of them on hands and knees, and the other fucking it from behind. All 4 luminous, empty eyes were on us as I called out my orgasm. I flooded Tara with seed. There was enough left over that it gushed out when I finally pulled out of her. She flopped to the ground bonelessly, before rolling over onto one side. "Oh wow," she moaned. Her eyes flew open once again when she realized I wasn't done. "On your knees," I told her. I scarcely recognized my own voice. Who was this guy, commanding an absolute stunner to get up on her hands and knees so he could fuck her? Whoever he was, she responded obediently, getting up on all 4s with her ass swaying side to side. She made another strangled groan as the full length of me speared forward and her pussy accommodated my size. Then all she could do was hang on while I pounded her relentlessly. Again, she demanded to have me pour all of what I had inside her. Again, I roared out my release, and it felt like buckets. We had sex 2 more times after that. Tara rode me while I lay down, then changed position and took me reverse cowgirl. Finally she laid down with her back on my chest, and I got 2 good handfuls of her breasts while thrusting up into her. She demanded, in the most lust-filled voice possible, that I dump it all inside. There was no way in hell I was going to stop being inside her unbelievable body, orgasm or no orgasm. I gave her every drop. We then lay on the grass and moss afterwards, panting and dazed. Tara had her arms wrapped around my upper arm, the most flattering of places to be held. The god must have departed at some point, because the ravenous need to mate had abated, and they weren't. 2 enormous, luminous eyes loomed directly overhead, set into a head made of green plant life I couldn't identify. Bits of soil showed through in a handful of places. "Don't move," I muttered. "What oh?" Tara started, but didn't leap up and go running. Her hands tightened around my biceps and triceps, as the thing stared down at us. Things. The other one was hovering above Tara's head as well. "We come in P." I didn't get to finish, before the creature brushed my forehead with its grassy face. The lightest, most feathery touch ensued, but I felt the immensity of the creature's power in just that flash of contact. The words immediately appeared in my mind, as opposed to the blocky 8-bit font I was used to seeing in the large blue windows. "The lovers have judged you worthy, and bestowed the gift of pleasure's bounty onto you. The lovers have seen you to be a capable healer with a radiant heart, and have awarded you with entwined ecstasy. The lovers have bestowed upon you +1 durability. You gain 1 durability token." The rush of pleasure that shot through me was nothing short of monumental. I had never felt anything like that. It was like having an orgasm from scalp to toes, buzzing everywhere beneath the skin. It felt like it lasted ages, though it was probably over in a few seconds. When I was able to think enough to make my eyes see again, Tara and I were definitely alone and the creature was gone. Pleasure's bounty. Special ability, legendary, active. Activate by spending any token when engaged in intimate acts. You and your partner receive experience depending on the breadth and pleasure each receives during the act. Holy crap. I checked, and found that not only was I a level 5 healer now, I was a level 3 pleasure seeker. Wow. Entwined ecstasy. Special ability, legendary, active. You may spend 2 like ability tokens when meeting someone to bring them into the fold. This expenditure is voluntary and may be cancelled by the other person at any time. This grants them a relationship status with you, and can even grant them a secondary class like yours. The higher your relationship status with an individual, the more pleasure you both attain from intimate acts with one another. I could not contain myself, looking over the 2 special abilities I had. The text of the second one specifically read, "A secondary class like yours," meaning not everyone I converted into my pervert circle would be a pleasure seeker. Some of them might be freak in the sheets maybe. Or in the case of Regina, secret sex friend. These abilities caused me to consider having a serious talk with the ranger who'd been sharing my bed. We needed to come to some kind of understanding, seeing as how I just had unprotected relations with a completely different person. A flash of panic shot through me, followed by a shot of exultation. I could now gain experience points directly from doing the deed, and I could increase pleasure from intimate acts with anyone who agreed to be in this with me. Flipping. Wild. "What in the ever-loving fudge was that?" she asked. "You felt that, right? You got a message about the thing that just happened." I thought that perhaps Tara didn't know about the way gods could grant these kinds of miracle powers. It wasn't something I wanted her to get into,
since I wasn't entirely sure I could keep myself safe in the event I touched another one of these things. I got a message, special powers and a free rank in durability.
She laughed.
They want you to be capable of even harder fracking than what I just got. Hoo boy, I may have to stay away from you. I could tell she was joking by the dopey grin on her face and the way she arched one of her blonde eyebrows. I can't really blame you, I said, and then faltered. We have to have a serious talk, don't we? Again the beaming smile. Oh, because you just filled me to the brim with god-enhanced magic jizz?
I wouldn't worry about it.
Those two were the lovers, not the god and goddess of fertility. Also, I just finished my period yesterday, so we're almost certainly safe.
What if we weren't?
I stammered an apology, which she waved away. It's not like you could have helped yourself.
I know I couldn't.
I needed you and me, right then, and there was absolutely nothing I could have done to stop it.
Oh.
If I end up, expecting, we'll jump off that bridge when we get to it.
Okay.
I had been around Sarah enough to know I should keep my opinions to myself in this regard. If Tara wanted a kid, then we'd be talking about next steps.
How much she wanted me involved.
Whether or not we would try for a real relationship to provide a unified front for the baby. For now it was too early to go jumping down that very deep rabbit hole. She took the conversation onwards anyway. And sure, that was lightning fast, as far as seductions go.
She laughed.
I had expected maybe a dinner date after this, haha. You're a good guy though. You're helping out your parents and your sister's kids. You took this job thinking you were going to lose your kidneys. You stood up to Blake, who is a total doofus. Yeah, I think you were definitely boyfriend material, if not bed-sharing buddy material. Again she had just started talking, and never seemed to need to stop. To recap, I had mind-blowing sex with an unbelievably attractive young lady who was well out of my league. The god of lovers was responsible for this. The god of lovers not only made that happen but also imbued me with sex powers, and now I was off scot-free with the super hot girl Tara, had a new secondary class to handle, pleasure seeker, and to top all that off, got new skill points and abilities for jumping to level 3 as a pleasure seeker. I stared down at my hands, wondering if I were dreaming and if seeing my hands would prove to me that I was in a lucid dream. Hey big guy, Tara said, and clapped a hand on my shoulder. Why don't we get these ingredients back to home base and get your mentor healed up, save the day, and celebrate? What do you say? That wide smile and those mismatched eyes.
She looked so pretty.
One gold eye, one sky blue, and all the crinkles around her eyes showing me how happy and excited she was.
I have to confess, I told her.
She gave me a conspiratorial grin and a wink. Confess away, big guy. There's a girl.
Oh yeah.
This didn't seem to dampen her mood even a little. You don't have to tell me who she is or anything.
Are you too, an item?
Yeah.
We haven't.
I'm not sure what we are. She's not my girlfriend, and we haven't talked about how to go forward, or if our relationship is really a relationship at all.
I'm interested in her. She's beautiful.
I hope that's okay.
Of course, silly.
She said, and climbed onto Raphael. I noted that she took a little longer than before getting on. Meaning I was left staring at her flesh-colored yoga pants that still had a wet spot in the middle. That wet spot was partially made up of the loads I'd shot up into her. Gods, she was beautiful. She looked over her shoulder from where she was on her hands and knees.
Come on aboard.
I scrabbled onto Raphael's broad back and clipped my hiking pack into the carabiner on the harness, then strapped it around the waist like before, and grabbed onto the harness.
Tara turned to me.
If there's no relationship, you don't have to worry. And since this whole thing was because of a god's influence, you super don't have to worry.
Thanks, I said.
I don't want to know who she is, and I'm not going to get in the way of whatever you choose to do. Her voice dropped back to that conspiratorial whisper again.
But I tell you what.
I want to find out if you're that good without having a god get in the middle of our business. I think maybe I got hypersensitized from its influence.
I mean, I came like 10 times.
That's never happened before.
She laughed.
I mean, I've only met like 2 gods total, but yeah, now 3 I guess. You want to find out, I said stupidly, then recovered. Yeah, that's great.
I'd love to.
You're gorgeous. She continued beaming.
Thank you, Fletcher.
I happen to think you're quite the handsome young man yourself.
She leaned toward me.
And I want to get my insides completely rearranged again soon, okay? I mean, I'm kinda sore down there, but in a good way, and I'm gonna get ready for round 2. That sounds amazing. It sounded way better than amazing. I was honestly flummoxed at going from basically zero sexual attention throughout high school and beyond to this. Yeah, so please have a talk with this girl, ask her out if you want, break up with her if you want, or haha, I don't know, tell her you have a long-legged 22-year-old who wants you all up in her guts, and she can figure out whatever your relationship really is and if she's going to put a chastity belt on you. I started getting hard again, just hearing her talk like this. The way Raphael's flying harness worked, it was easiest and most comfortable to lay on your stomach, or put your feet in the stirrups and get up on all fours. You could technically sit, but the way the manta ray rose up into the sky, it meant being jounced around. So when I looked over at her, and saw that butt of hers jutting up in the air, I couldn't help but salivate. And listen, she went on, once that confirmation session is done with, if you pass the test, she laughed nervously. If the second time is anything like the first, there's no reason a girl couldn't share, okay? This new world is practically Vegas, okay? What happens here stays here. Do you have a boyfriend then? I asked. Back in America? She laughed. No, but it wouldn't matter if I did, would it? What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Again my brain went into overdrive. Why not, was the first question. Why wouldn't she have a million men lined up to try to be with her? I guess it didn't matter. She didn't, and she wanted me, and that was that. I didn't want to freak out. Tara might be okay sharing, a concept that I just didn't understand at first. Did that mean if Regina put her foot down, that Tara would fight her for the chance to get that confirmation session? Would Tara just back me into a corner and try to have her way with me no matter what happened? And if, on the off chance I had this talk with Regina and she said sharing was a thing she could abide, what would that even look like? I thanked my lucky stars that Tara was okay with what happened, and B wanted to do it again, but now I had to add C, she was okay with me having multiple fuck buddies to the list of lucky stars in my sky here. I just hoped Regina wasn't going to freak out. Raphael set us down, making a high-pitched keening noise I didn't understand. I took it to mean he was worried about his companion human, so the discussion with Regina would have to wait. Tara waved goodbye with a knowing gleam in her eye. I didn't know yet whether the investigation into the god of footfalls had led to her being found in my dorm room, and I was low-key dreading the questions that would follow. So I did what I normally did when things were getting uncomfortable, I went to work. The healers occupied a wing of the right-side-up portion of the castle, even though Rainer and I were the only two healers in the place. It held pride of place not far from the courtyard, which doubled as an herb garden. The healer wing consisted of something like half a dozen different alchemy-style lab rooms, and Rainer kept two of them in use. The first was for human and Nakamoman health, he explained, which mostly boiled down to minor injuries and food poisoning. The other was for handling the ailments of the gods. This room had everything: large workbenches stocked with every type of vial and flask known to man, cupboards and cabinets for holding ingredients, and also racks set into the ceiling that held dozens of dried plants. The flowering plants hanging up there were all known to me: the phlox, the goat's beard, the bleeding hearts, the sage, witch hazel, and some that acted like poisons, along with the non-flowering plants I hadn't yet memorized. All were labeled according to a strict system Rainer set up. I would have gone alphabetical, but he had set them up differently. The henge grass needed drying, so I hung it up in its own place. The mist lilies had their petals plucked and their essence distilled, so I set up the lab equipment for that. Got the heat crystal burning, and put the distillation agent into the flask with the petals. Heat, evaporation, condensation, cooling, I muttered, and adjusted the distance between the heating element using telescoping tripod legs. Preparing the ingredients and then mixing them up took some time. Some of the ingredients, the purple Morpheus root, the Jaln oil, were already on hand, so I set those out. Magical remedies don't last, was the inscription on the wall, literally set into stone. It was carved into a block of almost pure white stone. Rainer explained that anything of a magical nature was bound to change into something else before too long. The addition of preservatives changed them into something else. Meaning the whole process had to be done from scratch at any given time. Fresh ingredients, freshly prepared, the next inscription said. It was like something out of a sub-restaurant chain advertisement. You got it, I muttered, and followed the instructions to the letter. We had ingredients enough to make the potion 10 times. This required the proper amount of heating, using a thermometer my dad would stick in his mouth as a child. The oil had to be heated to 180 and kept there, stirring often, but not constantly. The first to be added in were the freshly chopped Morpheus roots. The nice thing about having Earth handy was you could get a chopper, and slam your hand down on the thing about 12 times with rotating blades. The bad thing about having a magic-filled world was that these sorts of choppers were made of plastic and were prone to melting after a couple of days. And let me tell you, the stink of a melting plastic device from Earth is unbearable. This one had come through with Regina and her new cohort of one, at my request. I hadn't known they didn't last, but now that I knew, I was going to take advantage of the thing to the fullest. I had another day, possibly two, before whatever was in the plastic started to contaminate my ingredients. Thank the many, many gods for quality steel. The Morpheus roots needed to be soaked and stirred and kept at 180 degrees while the other ingredients got going. When I shouted out the door that I needed an extra set of hands for this, I was given a runner. Tara sauntered into the lab some 15 minutes later, smirking at me. "Hey there, Fletcher," she said. "I tell you what, today has been a pretty good day so far. I have had 0 complaints. Stir this every 5 or 10 seconds. And every 5 minutes, check to see that the temperature is 180. She frowned and blinked in surprise at being cut off, but got right to work, while I grabbed the henge grass from where they'd been drying. We had wind and heat creating nakamamon, and I'd been given the use of one to rapidly dry the henge grass. If all went well, all the moisture would be out, and I could just get whatever medicinal ingredient resided inside into the pot as soon as possible. A tiny gray-blue bird that was mostly mouth blew a steady stream of wind over the grass, while a creature that appeared to be a fat, droopy salamander napped nearby, radiating heat. It looked like a glob of lava, except the sides expanded and contracted slowly, and its tail twitched every so often. "You guys are miracle workers," I told them. "I think we're done." The magma creature's eyes opened. There were 4 of them, oily black chips of obsidian, and it gave a mighty yawn in response. No marveling at the many, many rows of teensy little teeth, I told myself. I wanted to give it a little scratch at the base of the head, but we didn't have any thick blacksmithing gloves in this room. It slid off the large metal tray on the workstation, which was glowing red, and plopped to the floor, then began shambling out, in alligator-like movements. As for the miniature bird, it had an enormous head for its size, and opened up its beak, exposing a cavernous maw. It then blasted me with wind for just a moment, its version of a tweet maybe, before puffing out of existence looking like a cloud. I caught a near-invisible rush of movement toward and then out the window. "This place is awesome," I muttered, and gathered up the henge grass. Tara peered at me. "Are you sure it has to stay at 180? Yes. Oh, and if it was 165 before I added more fuel to it? I haven't done this before, so I wouldn't know, I told her. I can only hope that. Nope, pretty sure that's ruined. Yep, the recipe noted that purple scum at this stage means failure. The potion had developed a purple oil slick on the top that hadn't been there before. Tara swore colorfully, though she didn't use the actual curse words. Then came the effusive apologies and the promise she wouldn't mess up next time. We had enough materials for a next time, right? I assured her that we did, and we really only lost 2 hours worth of work. Raynor wasn't doing well, but his rate of degradation hadn't sped up in the last 2 days. He would probably be okay another handful of days. The recipe noted that a purple scum was bad, meaning we needed to throw out the mixture, scour the cauldron, and begin again. Russ had been lying when he said I wasn't going to be in a house. I felt a lot like I was in brewing potions class, but without a professor. I was secretly thankful for no dark arts abjuration classes at all. I didn't feel like having the dark arts teacher to be the villain of every story, thanks much. We began again with a fresh cauldron while the other one dried off, and I showed Tara how to keep the temperature steady. When that didn't work and she flubbed up a second batch, I sent her after that Magamamander Nakamamon responsible for drying out the henge grass. Tara returned a few minutes later. "Awesome," put the creature. "Where's the Nakamamon?" She gestured over her shoulder at the woman entering the room, and smirked. In walked the largest woman I had ever seen. And the first native I'd ever seen. She was easily 7 feet tall, possibly taller. Her skin shone a brilliant orange, and she had a baffling amount of black hair. Like Princess Leia amounts of hair. It was braided up into big cinnamon buns. It was braided up into hanging ropes from around her ears back to the center of her head. It fell down her back and past her but in a curtain of shining silky black, with highlights of deep purple. The feeling of bigness only increased when she squeezed through the doorway. In addition to being fracking tall, she was fracking wide. Although in large part she looked humanish, several factors wiped that away. 1. Her hugeness. Her proportions weren't exactly right. Her arms were too long, her waist was too small. 2. She didn't have a nose. 3. She might have had ears or not, but the hair definitely seemed not human. It was too much. No human could have grown that much hair. Also, her clothing was alien. She wore a cross between a martial arts GI crossed with a monk's robe. The material was gauzy and partially transparent in the light, and thankfully she moved out of the direct sunlight and into the room where I couldn't see that she was definitely female. The uniform was white, trimmed with royal blue down the center and around her neck, and at the cuffs. It gave me the impression that she hadn't worn clothes before, but made them when humans showed up. She was cradling the magmamander in her arms, and it radiated heat. Fletcher, I'd like you to meet Laurel, she said. Laurel, this is Christopher Fletcher. You can call him Chris, Christopher, or Fletcher.
Hi, I said.
The native spoke directly into my brain. The words didn't come out of her mouth. Instead, they went directly into the speech center of my mind, with a husky and deep voice that made sense for this woman. You are the one who attempts to heal the god of footfalls. I stopped gaping at her and nodded. I'd nearly forgotten. For whatever reason, having random squeaks, squishes, crinkles, smashes and such were getting to be something I could work around. Luckily, with the god happily sedated by the treatment potion Rainer made, and subsequently the elixir he made for a longer-term effect, it lowered the volume.
I am, I said.
Then you are to be given every assistance you require. I am at your service, friend Chris, Christopher, or Fletcher. She then handed me a Nakamaman that was approximately 8,000 degrees. This is Christopher's next near-death experience.